Good morning to you all that are attending the Tamarack conference here. And so my name is Alvin Baptiste. I'm from the Red Pheasant Reserve First Nations in Saskatchewan. And so I'm here I was asked to do an opening prayer that we all come together and unite and helping each one of us, and to speak in good words and take something home from this uh, conference that you're attending. So I'm going to do an opening prayer, and so to start off with this conference. Mamo tawe no tamaga no nan wichi non kwesi mute paiki goi mute jetua kweski goi kakyo pai pe tu te chik pe mute paiki goi kai goi main geu awiak kai goi oxun ki goi tamaga no wichi hauk seneme kakyo miu pix goi chik miu paiki goi kai atamo chik ki goi I goi miu paiki goi pegi sik tamaga no kaiwai iwai matan ego miu chete chik miu pix chik saki go nek tamina wiche hawak tamagano kakyo kakyo ka ego mina ka spe ka kiwi chik mina miu meskina miu tago te chik nik we gwa mina tamagano ego mina mamo tawino tamagano kakyo wichi non Senemia, where si miu paiki wai senemia kakyo hai ton mamotawi no isagi tan hai tan hai.
Okay, I think it's my turn now. Thank you so much, Elder Alvin, for that beautiful land acknowledgement. My name is Emelia Connolly from Black Eagle Bloom, a nonprofit organization that focuses on environmentalism for Black women and Black peoples. I'm a Caribbean Canadian woman from Antigua and Jamaica, and I'm here to provide an African ancestral acknowledgement to continue opening the virtual stage for Engagefest, especially this year's theme of power of people and place. On behalf of Tamarack, I wish to acknowledge those who came to Turtle Island as settlers, as migrants either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Together we wish to pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent and thank them for their contributions towards transforming systems in ways that promotes everyone's sense of belonging and safety. To begin, my people come from a long line of land defenders, those who coexist with the land and feed the soil as the soil has fed them. As a Black environmentalist, we often hear sentiments that make diasporic peoples from Africa seem unnatural and displaced, not only from the land, but from the knowledge that has provided our generations with strength and subsistence. Reflecting on who I am and where I am from, specifically through my work with Black Eagle Bloom, I frequently work to reconcile a reality in which we were forcibly displaced, but did not and could never lose the yearning to be where the deer roam and wind blows from the greening prairies to the blue Atlantic coast. That is, we are and have always been peoples of the land. My Jamaican and Antiguan ancestors, chained together through the Atlantic, developed an intrinsic connection to the land to build generational resilience, a resistance that rears its head when my grandmother shapes dumplings in her Dutchy pot, when she guides my hand through the soil when we are gardening, and as she speaks in a dialect that is in its own right a symbol of survival. The chance to give this ancestral acknowledgement has carried with it the opportunity to highlight the resilience of African, Caribbean, and Afro-Latina peoples from all different generational lineages embodied through the land. I want to suggest something worth considering for those of you who are not in our community or those of you who have deep ties to the specific and extensive nature of your ancestors. For Black peoples who come from land-based cultures, we have gained intergenerational knowledge about growing our food, the connection between our spirituality with the natural world, and our ability to understand when our natural environment is being harmed and disrupted. However, consider what it means to have all these symbols, elements, and reminders of who we are and who our people are but consistently experience a divorce of such elements in today's society. To know that for Black people, we have long known the land, but have been told that we are not naturally inclined people, or we do not have the recognition from wider society that a piece of our ancestral and historical resilience gets chipped away at by every insertion that by some means of colonization, we have been completely erased from the hills, mountains, soils, and natural life of our lands. My time as an environmentalist has been an awakening journey, especially because being closer to the land symbolizes being closer to my roots in a long line of those who have came before me. If there is one thing I want to emphasize today about the Black community, it is our resilience to erasure and how we are able to carve out spaces for our communities that welcome our existence. We have done this in Turtle Island, from Little Jamaica to Africville, to Smoky Lake, Amber Valley, and Hogan's Alley in the Western provinces. Perhaps the land of Turtle Island welcomes us because its own Indigenous people know the pros of resistance as much as those who were forcibly displaced onto it. Similar to how the Blackfoot Confederacy knows Mohkinstsis, the Maroons of Jamaica know the Blue Mountains in Surrey County. History has created beautiful parallels between the resistance between Black and Indigenous folks, creating a natural and sustained solidarity. As a descendant of enslaved people from West Africa, I also want to acknowledge the many people of African descent who are not settlers, but whose ancestors were forcibly displaced as a part of the transatlantic slave trade, against their will, and forced to work these lands. It is in this way that I honor and pay tribute to Afro-Indigenous peoples, including Caribbean Indigenous peoples, Afro-Latina Indigenous peoples, and Indigenous folks across Turtle Island and beyond, in the past and future, who continue to fight for their identity, autonomy, sovereignty, and equity. Now, please kindly join us in the viewing of Titilope's arrival poem. Thank you.
Only the trees know what wayward wind buoyed the first 1,000 through river, creek, and muskeg. Feet a callous bark we peel until the fleshy center. We count the rings to tell us. How many lifetimes is the measure between a stolen land and a stolen people? What is lost eternally in the currency of the sale? How many paces is each generation between limber pine and baobab, between prairie grass and cotton? If we ask the sky, whose hands raised in prayer carried their people across the bridge, from one dream deferred into another, who nursed the children on the promise of home, a place of rest and refuge, it will answer. The women. In Campsie and Breton, in Clairview and Amber Valley, Clyde and Rosetown, in Wildwood, knuckles bloody from begging bush and meadow into farmland, fruit, into a harvest from the labor of living and loving, of running from that which will maim and unname, from all the ways the Black body is undone, unwound from the spool of its history, and unraveling for generations to gather. It is the women, arriving even now in Edmonton and Saskatoon, in Calgary and Regina, who touch their hands to the prairie dust and ask first of the land, what may I offer? Who ask first of the people, where may I flourish? Who pour the water of their gifts until an unforgiving winter gives way to spring. Women who teach the language of resistance and tally our remembering, who birth and bury, their hands beneath the braiding and baking, the building and bracing. We cannot gather what was lost beneath the ocean swell. We will never know whose baby teeth line the ocean floor, iridescent as seashells. So we honor what was before and after the boats, before and after the hands that spun the globe and scattered the seed. We honor what remains, the wild push and pull that gathers us here, our blackness blooming against the backdrop of a staggering white. We honor the song even the meadowlark knows, a centuries-old melody that gurgles to the surface to touch the land and call it home. What we speak in our sukus and ska, our soca, soul, and calypso, our kumpa and Afrobeat. What the women sing in the ears of children whose dreams take up their rightful place in the night sky. Children who say their mothers' names and close their eyes, knowing. My name is Titilope Sonuga, and this poem is called Arrival. Arrival is a sort of a celebration of the many ways that we come to this land as Black people on the prairies. It is a celebration of our gifts, our talents, our history, good and muddy. All of it is an arrival of sorts. I hope that people take from this poem a sense of belonging, that we too, as Black people on the prairies, have arrived and brought ourselves in all our wild and wonderful colors to this land, that we too have a history here, and we too are a part of this big family. I hope that it makes Black people who are just arriving on the prairies feel less alone, like there's a sense of place here for them also, and that they can plant their own roots.
Good morning to you all. Welcome to Engagefest. And I did the opening prayer this morning that we all come together and unite as the human beings, the human people that come together. I've always learned from our elders that we're all related, and we all are connected to Mother Earth, and that we all belong to Mother Earth. And so I did an opening prayer this morning, and I prayed for everybody that are attending this fest, and that everybody will get along. Everybody will speak in good words, and also with love. Love. This is what the Creator is. Creator is love, the Spirit of love, the Father. We have many names that we have for the Creator, and so I send my blessings out to each and one of you, that you all have a good trip home. The ones that are far and near, that will come together and enjoy each other's company there, to learn something from each other and take it home to your community. And so that we work together for a better, for our children. And this is what this is about. Tamarack is about future generations, and to build a better community for for our kids. A safe community, a healthy community is what we are striving to for our children. Also, the ones that are far away, hopefully you will take this and learn something from each and one of us. So I thank you all, and you guys have a blissful day. Take care of each other, and with love. Love is what we need in this world, and that's God is love. So you guys have a wonderful day. Take care, and miyasin miyukiskat miyasin kisepayag. Have a good day. Good morning. Hi, hi.
Thank you, Elder Alvin and Emelia, for opening Engagefest in such a beautiful way. Love is what we need. This is a love fest. I don't think I could have said it any better. My name is Heather Keam. I'm a mom, wife, and rural girl, and I've been working at Tamarack Institute for almost 10 years. And I'm so excited to be a co-MC today. Throughout my life, I have encountered challenges related to belonging, mental health, and disconnection. These experiences have fueled my lifelong commitment to supporting communities by bringing together the strengths of people, groups, organizations, and governments. I believe that everyone has a gift to contribute, and true change stems from the collective power of people and the communities they live in working together towards a common goal. I'd like to welcome my co-MC, Nick.
Thank you, Heather. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Herd, and I work with Lars Canada. I am here because I want to teach people about who I am. There's nothing wrong with me, but I want to help people who don't have disabilities to change their minds about people with disabilities. It's important to me that nothing about us happens without us. It is important to have voices, and I am here to help amplify those voices. I also do other projects with L'Arche International. And recently, I was in Croatia alongside colleague Lori Van Holt. We were leading about change with youth leaders from 5 different countries. Our team helped them create a webinar to take back to their countries. I am here because I want to learn more with all of you.
Thank you so much, Nick. I know Nick is all over the world. Sometimes I say, where is Nick today? So Nick and I are really excited to co-MC Tamarack's first Engagefest event with all of you today. Tamarack and L'Arche Canada have had a long partnership in working together to build communities that support a sense of belonging and connection. Before we get started today, I just want to take a moment to recognize that Tamarack is dedicated to creating safer and welcoming spaces for everyone. We aim to prevent harm and ensure everyone's well-being in our virtual spaces. By attending this event, you're agreeing to listen to others, to welcome differences, be open to change, and make spaces so that everybody feels heard and belongs. By participating in Engagefest, you are committing to be respectful, free of any harm of discrimination, oppression, or harm. Tamarack also reserves the right to remove anyone who does not follow this shared agreement. Thank you for helping us create a positive and inclusive learning experience for everyone. So, Nick and I would like to officially welcome you all to Tamarack's first Engagefest. This event is about engaging with your colleagues, your communities, and your peers from across the globe. Fest is about celebration, celebrating the amazing work that you do in your communities, in our cities, our towns, across the country, and are making a huge impact locally and globally. In our ever-changing world, the key to a better future lies in how people and their communities work together. The strength of diverse perspectives and teamwork helps drive innovation and progress. Through collective action, we can tackle big changes, big changes like climate change, poverty, and tapping into the endless potential of human leadership and creativity. Just as important is the role of the places we live. Our surroundings shape who we are, what we strive for, influencing our lives and our communities. Taking care of these environments is essential. It is important, not just for our own well-being, but also to safeguard the resources for our future generations, our children, our friends' children, our grandchildren. By caring for both people and the places we call home, we can create a brighter future for everyone. Today's topic is about the power of people. Power of people. Their abilities to recognize strengths, mobilize resources, and lead change. Over the past 5 years, we've seen how communities can unite to tackle challenges and inspire change. I truly believe, I really believe that people are the real superheroes of change. And we must shift power and we must support people to make it happen. Today is about working together to uncover the opportunities for positive community change. Nick, what do we got over the next 2 days?
Okay. Over the next 2 days, we will be focusing on building connections, sharing new ideas, and gaining insights to help you make real progress in your natives. You will discover how to use local knowledge and community strengths to improve our systems. Learn new ways to inspire teamwork and support collective efforts. You will have time to meet community change makers from across North America and beyond to explore their creative approaches to inclusion and shifting power dynamics. We will gain practical tools, strategies, and examples to drive change and create lasting impact in your community. You will have time to connect with changemakers from across North America and beyond. We will hear stories, learn from our challenges, and celebrate our achievements. Our learning will be so rich because we have over 400 participants from 5 countries.
So Nick just gave us a huge list. I hope that Engagefest and what we planned for you can help to achieve this. Actually, I don't hope. I know it. I know we are going to achieve all of these learnings that we have. Thank you, Nick. And I also wanted to highlight that of the 400 participants, the countries are Canada and the United States. We have the Netherlands. And I do want to highlight, because this is very dedicated, very dedicated. We have people from Australia and New Zealand, which if you know the time change, it is super early. So they probably have a huge pot of coffee. I just want to warn you that this next section is a little bit long, but we wanted to set you up for a great experience. So just bear with us. We're going to go through everything that you need to know so that you can connect and learn and share and meet all the commitments that Nicholas just put out for us. So as you know, this is a virtual event, and we want to help navigate your learning through this platform called HouseSpace. And this is our virtual stage. So this is where we'll put house our keynotes, our workshops, and our discussion boards. And I wanted to thank those of you who filled out your profiles and taken the time to introduce yourself. I have gone through them, and I want to say I think I know almost everybody in there. I think I know 400 people. And we've already seen some connections made and contact information exchanged. So if you haven't done that yet, please do so. So we can actually meet one of our objectives, which is meeting your community change makers. We have a couple tips for you. So on the top of your screen, you will see tabs. And there's a welcome tab. And this is where we will host our main plenary sessions for the next 2 days. I have learned that Naomi from Halifax is excited to dive into the workshops, that Jennifer from Red Deer is looking to get inspired and reinvigorated. Woohoo! This is what we need. And Lisa from Yellowknife wants to connect with like-minded people. So please fill in your profile so Louisa can connect with you. We then have the community tab. This is a great resource for you to learn about each other and make those connections. Trian has created, there's a brag board. That's where I wanted to point you to, brag board, because Trian has created and launched a Find Your Village building card game. And John has developed an educational community building climate change projects. So that brag board is a really, really important one. Go there and see what's out there. We have the agenda tab so that you can know what's going on. And then we have a Who is Tamarack? So just in case you don't know who we are, there's a tab there. It's actually, I'm thinking, really important for your post, because we are here post-event and here to support you in your change-making journey. And then if you have any accessibility questions or requirements, the FAQ tab is where you can get some information. So over the next 2 days, you will see new tabs. And we're going to help, that's going to help you to navigate where you need to go. For those of us who prefer to read or write in a different language, if you haven't done so already, you're welcome to click onto your profile. Actually, we're suggesting everybody go up to your profile, click on it, and pick your language, even if you're from English, because that allows people to write in their own language and will translate for you. And a very, very important section is the technical questions. If you need any support for this platform, below us, you will find a technical question box, and Duncan, who is magic, will be able to help you through anything that you need. And then for those of you who are active on social media, please tag us in any of your tweets and your posts using at Tamarack Institute, all one word, or hashtag Engagefest 2024. And I've got a challenge for you all. Let's make Engagefest the trending tweet for today. Okay? So we want to get you all warmed up. Below Nick and I, there should be a question box that pops up, and we want to know why it's important for you to be here today. So please take a moment to answer that question. And just wanting to let you know that we are going to 5 p.m. both days. Today, we have 2 amazing speakers who are going to have a fireside chat and around awakening leaders in the places we live. And then we're going to have a break. And then we're going to go into workshops right after that break. And then we're going to go into another break. And then we're going to come back. And we have an amazing keynote and a discussion panel around shifting power. So I wanted to highlight that this is your space. And I love the law of 2 feet. We encourage you to get up, to stretch, to eat, to drink, to move to a new location. We are here. It's virtual. It can be very tiring. So get up and switch around and find a new location. I'm passing it to Nick because he's going to tell you about some groups of people.
Okay. Engagefest is an online event, but we know how important it is to gather and learn together in person. We're excited to announce that Tamarack partners and members are hosting meetups and watch parties in the following locations. I would like to say hello to town of Nelson in city of Victoria, British Columbia. Welcome to the city of Edmonton, Alberta. And it's so happy to have the Battlefords from Saskatchewan to join us. It's good to see you, town of Winkler, Manitoba. And wow, so many watch parties in Ontario. City of Durham, London, Toronto, town of St. Thomas, Elgin, and the neighborhood of Willowdale, and bonjour, Montreal, Quebec.
C'est bon. I also wanted just to do a little plug that Elder Alvin is part of the Battlefords project. And so I just wanted to do a little shout out there. They're doing some phenomenal work in Battlefords. So we are going to move on. I don't know if there's a word cloud. We might show that later. We are going to move on to our fireside chat. I am so excited about this. These two speakers are inspirational, have really changed my life in the work that they do. And I am just so excited that they're here with us today. So now more than ever, it is imperative that we empower ourselves and those around us to lead with compassion, generosity, and curiosity. This fireside chat is about challenging each other to uncover root problems, shifting power, and building a foundation for sustainability and impact. I wanted to note that there is a question box. So throughout the fireside chat, please add any questions in there. I'm going to be monitoring it and harvesting it, and I will bring forth any questions that you have at the end if there is time, because I know these two, once they start talking, they could probably go on all morning. So I am thrilled to introduce Louise Adongo. I have known Louise for a few years now, and I'm always amazed at her passion and her desire for change. She is another lady where I'm like, where is Louise today? Louise has been part of Tamarack community for many years. She was the CEO of the backbone organization that was instrumental in supporting the Communities Building Youth Futures Network in Digby, Nova Scotia. This network was part of the original 12 communities. You can learn more. We'll post a report so you can learn more about the projects. Louise was also a co-MC for our asset-based community development virtual workshop event in 2021. Wow, that is long ago. Louise is a bold and grounded leader with over 10 years of experience in systems change, policy, and evaluation. I know Louise has someone who brings care and intention to uncovering the roots of tangled problems, enabling shifts to greater resilience, sustainability, and impact. Louise, I am so happy you're here with us today. Nick, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. I would like to introduce Margaret Wheatley. Margaret first became passionate about helping people in 1966 when she volunteered with the Peace Corps in post-war Korea. Throughout her career as a speaker, teacher, consultant, advisor, and leader, she has always believed that good leaders must inspire people's natural generosity, creativity, and need for connection. As the world becomes more divided, she believes that wise leadership focused on uplifting the human spirit is incidental. Since 1973, Margaret has worked with a wide range of organizations around the world, from U.S. Army leaders to Girl Scouts, from CEOs to small town ministers, and from universities to royal Aboriginal communities. She has written 12 books, and I highly recommend her latest one, Restoring Sanctity Practice to Awaken Generosity, Creativity, and Kindness in ourselves and our organizations. Please join me in welcoming Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you so much to you, Heather and Nicholas, for the welcome. I certainly am very pleased to be here in this fireside chat with Margaret Wheatley. We're going to talk about leading in place, but actually, before we do that, I have to bring up Meg Wheatley's poetry, which is my introduction to Meg. I love poetry. I love creativity and the arts. I have always felt that they just end up being a good short circuit to my spirit and take me out of my head and my intellect. And so my introduction to you through poetry actually is not a surprise to me. And I really just would like to turn it over to you, Megan. Ask, like, what came first, the poetry or the work in systems, or both together at the same time? Because I'm genuinely curious, and I also thank you for writing and putting it out in the world.
Well, thank you, Louise. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and I just want to express my welcome to all of you who are engaging with me and Louise right now in Engagefest. And today, this morning, I just launched my book of poetry, which is called Opening to the World as It Is. And it's a downloadable book because I wanted to get it out in the world. So I'm out in the world. It's one of the greatest gifts that I've been in so many different places, so many different cultures. I've lived in several of them. And as you heard Nicholas describe, I've just worked with just about everyone at this point. And I write poetry when I cannot express the depth or complexity of my feelings in prose. So the poetry comes after the experience, when I'm just so deeply moved by something that I want to express it, but it takes the discipline, as you would have found out, Louise. Poetry requires discipline. And it's the same discipline that you and I bring to our spiritual practices now, which we'll talk about. So that's my desire was to get these poems out right now, because they're a range of expressions, from the joy of being together to the suffering that is so apparent in so many places. So
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. For anyone who has not yet read any of Meg Wheatley's poetry, I canvassed my network, and a lot of people really like the poem Flawless. But one of my favorites is Listening for My Name. So if you're going to start with any two, I would say those. So I'm going to share some experiences I've had as a community member, or in leading in place and leading in community, and my reflections around that and what I've learned about it. And then turn it back over to Meg to share additional context and additional scale and reflection of that from systems. So the context of my examples is rupture and repair, because really a big piece of reflection that I've had is, in community, there's not really we can't anymore talk about people we won't work with or people we won't partner with because relationships are really integral in community, and we will find ourselves in a context where we have no one to work with if we start thinking that way. So two examples I have specifically around leading in community. There was a project that I was invited to participate in, and our organization was invited to lead, and it was going to be in 7 different communities, and it necessitated working with community navigators. And it was important to everyone on the team, or so we thought, for the community navigators to really hold the context and the wisdom for how these projects would play out in place. But over the course of the co-design, it became very clear that the voices of the community navigators were just not being listened to, and the concerns that they were raising were not being received well. Specifically, they felt that the process or enterprise system for managing some of the administration of the project in place was going to create friction and delays in terms of disbursement of funds, or just navigating administrative process in place. And they raised this several times during co-design. And I tried very hard to represent their voices in the context of this partnership, both because I felt that they knew exactly what they were saying. They were brought in place because they're the subject matter experts, but also because what they were saying made a lot of sense from previous times that I engaged in such projects. So about 7 months later, everything that they said came to pass. And now we were faced with a situation where community members were very upset about what was playing out in real time for them. And as tends to happen, because we're all human, that we're looking for the sources of blame, who didn't do what right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things I can say that I learned from that experience was how important it is, the role that community navigators in place hold, and how preserving their social connections to the relationships that they hold in place is really important. And sometimes enterprise larger organizations put process before that relationship. And even when it ought not be that way, and how much harder that makes it for the next time around that a project comes into that space. I also learned, though, that people have a lot more patience and willingness to work through something if you're honest with them about where you've fallen short. So the speed with which a validation of the experience was made, that yes, this is unfortunate and it shouldn't happen this way. These are the ways we are planning on mitigating it. And this is the feedback we're giving to this enterprise management body about how to not do this again next time, was really reparative in the support of maintaining relationships across multiple contexts. And it took a lot of time, and it wasn't funded and resourced, is where I guess I would end that. But my lesson personally was, you have to take the time to take that time, because you are balancing not just the written down project objectives from a funder, but you are balancing a lot of shadow dynamics that never show up in the final report, that never show up in the evaluation, but absolutely are instrumental in making those documented results happen. A second example I would share, just before I turn it over to you, was a much deeper context piece in a community where there was an unspoken, it was kind of a bad smell in the room, for lack of a way to say it, and nobody could quite pinpoint what it was that was going on. But there was a feeling that the organization I was representing was better funded than the other organizations in the room. And so other organizations that were feeling at a deficit or at a loss were quite comfortable constantly telling our organization what we should do and not do. And And what was interesting to me was some of those organizations, the way they were structured, they actually had access to way more funding than our organization did, because some of them had charitable status, some of them had much broader mandate, et cetera. But it really, in a context of scarcity and deficit and a continuous competition model, it really fostered narratives that weren't, it didn't seem that they were productive or helpful in the context of space. In that context, I can say what I learned is, so I've been following Byron Katie's work for a long time. And she writes a book, I think it's called Who Would You Be Without Your Story? And I had compassion for the organizations because there was a really strong narrative that was in place, that was not being examined, that was allowing these ways of being to be perpetuated. And so I think I learned a lot more from, I can share lots of great examples and stories, and we have them on our on the website of the organizations we've been on, and I can put them in the comments later. But I find I learn much more from rupture and repair than from everything goes well the entire time. And so I just wanted to turn it over to you, Meg, to comment on that. But I guess one last thing I will say is, in the context of leading in place and how do we do better, I asked myself the role of other organizations in a context where there's that organizational infraction of preserving the container of community trust and working in communities. And how do we invite ourselves to step into those moments, whether we agree or disagree with whoever it is that's causing the smell in the room, what else is happening in the room? And we'll turn it over to you now. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Louise. I want to draw attention to relationships, which you introduced at the very beginning. And then I want to draw attention to the lens through which you viewed these issues when they appeared, when they blew up. Because I think this is the power of your experience, is one of knowing what's important to keep track of. And for me, I just want to say the leader's role is always, you are the only one, all of you as leaders, you are the only one who can see the whole of what's happening, what different people are experiencing, what different outside agencies are experiencing. And that's a learned perception. You really need to take responsibility for tracking what's happening, because nobody else sees it. Everyone else, you saw it because you were keeping watch, but everyone else is just in their own little dramas and their own little needs. And this is one of the primary functions of leadership, is to just have a refined enough lens, a skilled lens that develops only through experience, so that you can track what's happening and what's important to pay attention to. Now, that's a huge role for leaders these days, but I also have to say, with utmost sympathy and empathy, you're also the target for attacks and blame. And why didn't you fix it? Why didn't you stop this? So too many leaders are assumed to be power fixers, whereas what you described and what you've shared with me also is you're tracking process, you're tracking interactions, which we could just sum up as saying, you are so sensitive to relationships. I have to say that comes from your Kenyan ancestral grounding, because what I learned working in depth in Zimbabwe and South Africa is that this became my favorite truth in the form of an expression. Humans can get through anything as long as we're together. Now, those of us who grow up in this competitive, increasingly narcissistic and blame-filled culture, we never knew that. We never knew. I had to learn it by stepping outside of Western culture. And I just think it's in you. For many, many centuries of people who understood that this is the motto of my Berkana Institute. Whatever the problem, community is the answer. And that's why I love being with all of you today within Tamarack. So how do you pay attention to relationships? And I'm going to ask you to get a little more granular, Louise. What were you noticing at meetings or in interactions? If you were together, that's a benefit. But what were you noticing that made you pay attention to, oh, relationships are being affected or are in danger here?
Yeah. I mean, I think for one thing, in my ancestry, honoring uh, honoring interactions and relationships is really it's really important. Like we have a tea culture, and I've always appreciated Indigenous people I've been in gatherings with here in Nova Scotia.
Yes.
Some of them will say things like, "We'll start when we start, and when we're finished, we're done." So honoring the being together more than the start time and the end time of something, for example. In terms of what I was noticing, I guess therefore I would say that it was that dishonoring. It was somebody would say something that sounded reasonable, that really needed to be assessed and discussed and mitigated, and it would be invalidated, as opposed to being put on the table as a valid observation that needed to be considered and addressed. And that's a pattern, I think, in all the interactions, regardless of positionality, identity, the topic, the theme, etc. It's that not all voices were treated as having something useful or valuable to contribute. Some were given more space than others. And I think the other thing that I noticed is, resources or whatever is perceived as a more important attribute was situated higher than just, community. Even just saying community voices is not community voices and consultant. Already that is a power differential. Right. So, I mean, in real time, I probably wasn't like but those would be some of the things that I would say. And I will bring this to the next piece I want to talk about of practicing horror. Is it didn't seem by intention. It could have been subconscious. And I was in an elevator with someone the other day because there was a bomb threat and there was emergency vehicles everywhere. And they were saying to me, "Oh man, this is so tiring." And I said, "Yeah, it feels like we've been practicing horror in a way we haven't before since the most recent pandemic." And so I think that's also something that I was noticing, and I've been noticing more and more, is we are walking around consciously when subconsciously we're in a state, our amygdalas are in a state of we're practicing horror, and that's causing us to show up very differently. I could add more, but I just wanted you to comment on that.
I want to these two that we just raised. So the first is the ability to notice what's happening with relationships, power dynamics, gender dynamics, racial dynamics, all the isms that come to the fore now. And the reason they are so much more prominent is because we are in the amygdala. We feel under threat. And this is just pure neurobiology, that when we're under threat, we instantaneously fear the stranger. We fear the other. And we can't collaborate. We can't even act as fully human beings until we're in a process, a place of that feels welcoming. which is how we turn our brains back on, our frontal lobes, which is where everything we need is housed neurologically. It's only when we're in our fully human brains, the frontal lobes, that we can imagine, that we can dream, that we can care, that we can bring forth memories, learnings that are useful in this moment. So what you describe as this constant state of horror, I might call it feeling under threat all the time. This is what we see in meetings right now, that we can't recognize someone else's contribution as valuable if I'm sitting here feeling threatened, period. It doesn't matter what I'm feeling threatened by, but it's probably not the person who's speaking that I tune out from. It's because once we're in the amygdala, we have a natural, instinctive, autonomic response to fear anyone who looks different. This is just so well documented. So for me, the act of leadership is to recognize that and not blame the people for being any kind of racist, sexist, gender, whatever. No, our role as leaders to build community is we have to create the conditions for people to feel welcome, to settle down, to calm down. This is hospitality. This is in all sorts of rituals where we gather together and the first thing we're doing is celebrating being together, or we're sharing a meal, we're sharing coffee. That is essential these days to physiologically bring forth our humanity. We cannot work in meetings with scared people, period.
Yeah.
So, there are many rituals, there are many ways to create hospitable space, but for me, that's 70% of our work right now as leaders, rather than noticing and blaming people for all their biases, judgments, etc. So, and
Yeah.
I just want to say that every indigenous tribal nation knows to do this. And so having some form of meeting where we take time, if we're on Zoom, to check in with each other. How are you doing? What's happening in your life? Or what's a good thing that just happened to you today? Just to create a sense of,
No.
is that your child? Okay, that's your 5-year-old daughter, right? This is the challenge of working at home. But anyway, I want to say one more thing about relationships, because that is what explains to me, and it's essential to understand. Our first job as leaders is to welcome people back as fully human beings, because that's when we'll find the capacities we need for caring, for visioning, for imagination, all of that. But the other piece of this is, for all of you, when you are picking up in your role as leaders or community developers, when you are picking up that something is fracturing people, driving us apart, most often it's when something goes wrong. And if you
Yes.
notice when something is going wrong, then the work of the leader is to call people together, get out of the scapegoating, get out of the blame. Let us call people together and use a process in which we can just listen to everyone's understanding, personal perception of what's just gone wrong here. What's happened, rather than who's to blame, who's at fault. So I'm sure you have lots of experience with that.
I do. As a final kind of wave of our talking, there's a question that's been asked, there's a comment that's been made about funding as an extremely frustrating power dynamic. And I'm wondering, in a context, speaking of narratives and our stories, and you and I talked also, bonded about Louise Hay and power and our thoughts, and that we have more than enough time to do what we need to do. And I similarly think about resourcing and capital in abundance. And the funding being limited is true, but what other resources and capitals do we have available to us is a question that I was asking. This one is specifically about needed compensation for equity denied folks. So perhaps it's a question of how we redistribute the funding we already have.
Yeah, but that's
versus
not
more.
what we're here to talk about.
Yeah. And then another question is about if defensiveness is amplified or dampened by virtual meetings and collaborations. But I think before, I think I wanted to connect this to in the times that we're living in, because if I bring this back to myself, which speaking of leading in place, kind of self-awareness and how I am being as a person is really important to hold on to, kind of my own inner work and my own inner practices. When I think about what has me feeling under threat, it's knowing that status quo is not working, but not really knowing what is to come. And that uncertainty discombobulates me in many different contexts. And so in leading in place in times like these, thinking back to the Berkana loop and the role of pioneers, what ought we to be doing to manage those feelings in ourselves and to support us to lead in our communities from whatever position we're in is a question I have for you, but I am also asking all of us who are here.
Okay.
Is as kind of being on the frontier of the spaces and the places where we are in our communities, what do we do with all of that?
Well, there's so many things in those comments and in your question to me. I want to first say that the need is to understand where we are and to realize that no one is coming to help. So I wrote a whole book about this with Deborah Fries called Walk Out, Walk On, Communities Daring to Live the Future Now. We are not going to change these terrible, oppressive dynamics of inequity, injustice, indifference at the federal level, at the provincial level, or at wherever we are. I work in many countries, of course, but of course, the United States now is in the most perilous position in its history. So let's just not accept by giving up the reality of this time, but let us realize that this is another one of my slogans. There is no power for change better, more powerful than a community discovering its own, what it cares about and itself as the primary asset. This is why I've written my most recent book, Restoring Sanity, because we as leaders within our staff groups, within our community, we can find the practices that bring people together. And it's not waiting for anyone else to rescue or save us, because nobody is coming to help. But we have so much unexplored potential in our staff groups if we just use the right processes. We have so much creativity and generosity that is never extinguished in the human spirit. So I want to get out of this poverty mentality that we are oppressed, suffering, traumatized, and nobody's paying attention to us. I want us to pay attention to us. I want us as leaders and community developers, and I have a lot of experience with this, to realize that with the right conditions and the right questions, we can discover a richness of creative ideas, a richness of compassion and caring. So I want to change that. And this then takes us to the inner work that you and I talked about with Louise Hay. Now, any practice, any teacher who leads us to understand that we create the conditions of our own experience. Something happens to us, like we lose a grant, we lose funding, or there is an outrageously racist incident in our town. How we interpret that is the meaning making, the sense making, and how we interpret our experience always then predicts our response. And for you and me, what we shared with Louise Hay, and I'm a practicing Buddhist of many decades, I know that I can take control of my reactions and give it some contemplation, some thought. I can do this as an individual, but I can do it with my staff group. What just happened? What are we going to learn from what happened? And therefore, we are creating a response rather than an emotional knee-jerk reaction, because we've taken the time to open our minds and reflect on what just happened. And however you do that, that's the essential skill now for all of us to get through what is such an insulting, horrifying time. And I'm speaking as an American right now, okay? It is unbelievable what's happening in this country with Trump's hatred and all of it's just unbearable. But I know to control my mind with it and choose a response rather than just go crazy with my anger and rage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking of, I just read What It Takes to Heal by Prentice Hemphill, and I'm thinking of people who are listening in wherever you are in the world. You know, there's climate grief, there's multiple possible things that you could be thinking about that are cataclysmic or bringing grief. And what I appreciated, if I had listened to you say what you say, let's say 5 years or 3 years from now, I would have said, what are you talking about? I just need change. There's no accepting these circumstances. We are changing the things we cannot accept. And I'm listening to you now and reading this book and thinking that, yes, but how you choose to go about those changes, what strategies you devise around what change looks like is very different if you're operating from a place where you have more access to a groundedness than not. And I would say that another thing I have really accessed and encouraged people leading in place to access, which is not very comfortable for us to do, is compassion around grief. It is not surprised that there is so much grief and grieving to be done and to do, and building a capacity for that and for allowing those around us to do it is really helpful for us. And learning new ways of doing that that are not as individualized. Again, I think probably from my Kenyan experience, actually my sister and I were talking about this. There are people who actually are almost like professional wailers. And as a child, my sister didn't understand the need for them. And the other day she said, I need one of those people to come and just do all my crying for me because I have such deep wells of it. I just wanted to, we're close to time and we've got comments.
I just want to say one thing about grief, please. I mean, I just was reading Maasai people in Tanzania, and they have grief caves where people go to grieve. But I want us to focus on what is the purpose of grieving. And it has to be a movement to understanding the human condition is always filled with terrors and horrors and sadness. And then we can transform that sadness into pure compassion and understanding for other people. There has to be a reason that we want to grieve, and it's because we then shift from this intense sadness to open hearts from which we can feel compassion for all people who are suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I know I wrote myself two bullets before we started speaking, and it said place, relations, rupture and repair for transformation. I feel like that's a really great place to close.
Yes, it's
Thanks.
wonderful. Okay, are there comments, or do we have time for any comments, Heather?
We don't, but I got an idea. So
Okay.
Nick and I are going to come on and do a summary, but I've got an idea.
And that is?
So Nick and we have been capturing some of these amazing quotes. And my idea is for the two of you to go in and see the questions that are in there. And if you could just put in your thoughts and stuff in the questions, because that will allow people, first of all, it'll capture the answers and allow people to have a dialogue versus trying to do it in 1 minute. Does that work?
Well, I don't see where I can go in. It's not showing on my screen, but you're asking us to write a response later.
Yes, we will get you the link and you can kind of go in and have a look. This is the part that I don't like doing, is cutting off folks. But we are also heading into a break, and I recognize we've been sitting for a while. And as
Can I
someone who is,
Can I
you
close
can close.
poem, please?
Yes, please close with
Okay.
a poem. I didn't want to pressure you, but this will make my day.
All right. This poem is entitled "We Never Know Who We Are," and I'm offering it to all of us here today. We never know who we are. This is strange, isn't it? Or what vows we made, or who we knew, or what we hoped for, or where we were when the world's dreams were seeded. Until the day just one of us sighs a gentle longing, and we all feel the change. One of us calls our name, and we all know to be there. One of us tells a dream, and we all breathe life into it. One of us asks why, and we all know the answer. It is very strange. We never know who we are.
Thank you. That is beautiful. What a great way to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Meg and Louise. And I'm holding up this book. This book, I'm telling you, it's something you must put on your Christmas wish list for reading and order it. So Nicholas wants that book now. All right. So thank you so much. And Louise, you know what? You're just so inspirational, and the work that you're doing is what we need now in our communities. And I just want to thank both you and Meg for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And let's say that this is a till next time, not a see you later, because I have a feeling that we just started a fire. And we're going to turn it into a bonfire, and we're going to grow this, and we're going to make change. So thank you so much. Thank you. So now, Nicholas and I captured some little tidbits that we wanted to share. So Nicholas, actually, you know what, Nicholas, I'll go first, and then you can go and then do the break stuff. So I love the rupture and repair. I love community is the answer. And I cannot say it enough. Community is a superhero in all of our crises. And we need to center community and center people. Call people together to listen. seek to understand. And I know there's a question there about how people are moving, like, how do we move forward when we're in fear? Seek to understand the fear, understand why there's hesitation, because then you'll be able to know how to go forward. People are not to be fixed. And I'm going to end with two things that I learned, but it was in my head, and this discussion brought it out, is we have to stop using the word empower. We don't empower community. We don't empower people. People and community are powerful. And also my slogan or saying for this year is old ways won't open new doors. So let us try to find new ways. Let's go forward in new ways because the old ways aren't working. So those are my summaries. Nick, over to you. What's one thing that your aha, and then let's move into break.
Well, actually, I have to say it's the same thing as you, that we should not use the word empower. I agree with you on that, Heather. We both have the same minds there. So we're about to take a 15-minute break. You will see a countdown timer on HouseSpace. After the break, we'll go straight into the workshops. You can find the workshops tab at the bottom of your screen, which has a list of all the upcoming workshops, descriptions, and Zoom links to join after the break. Just a reminder, you will get recordings of the workshops in a few weeks after Engagefest ends. Enjoy your break, and we'll see you back here at 2:20 when we will hear from George A. about how we can shift power in practice. See you then.
I have the difficult to say it's a 10-minute break. We had to shorten it. So sorry, folks. So it's 10 minutes and then your workshop.
10 minutes.
Yeah. All right.
Perfect.
Have a great break.
Welcome back, everyone. While we are waiting to get everyone back into the main space, I would love to hear about your workshops. In the workshop question box below, tell us what workshop you attended, how would you rate it, and any comments you would like to add about it.
So I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to take us to the next little bit. And I reviewed HouseSpace over the break and the workshops. And I just wanted to bring everybody back to that question that we asked in the very beginning about, why is it important for you to be here today? And we've created a word cloud that is just below us. And some of the key words were create, gain, practice, skills, making, connect. So Nick, I think when we talked about our objectives and you listed those, I think we nailed it. I think that's what people are looking for. And then there was this one quote I want to bring out, and it was Jennifer. And Jennifer says, I am largely aware of how much I don't know. So appreciate the opportunity to learn with this community. I love it. I'm going to be one of the ones that I come in here thinking I know it all, and then get shocked when I find things. And so I think that's a really great way when you're coming to a learning event, is coming in and with that mindset that I'm here to grow and learn new, and not necessarily coming in that I know everything. So, and then I hope everybody got up and stretched. Nicholas, what did you have to eat for lunch?
Well, I only had an apple because I don't want to get anything messy on my outfit.
Oh, yes, and that's a really good outfit. And apple a day keeps the doctor away. So that's pretty healthy. Did you get up and did you move around and go for a
Oh,
walk or
yeah,
anything? Yeah.
I did.
Ah, awesome. I took my dog for a walk, hoping that he'll be quiet for the next part of this and loaded his treats. Okay, so you guys don't want to hear from Nick and I anymore, because I know you want to hear from George, our next keynote. So I want to welcome George A to the virtual stage to share his wisdom on shifting power. In 2011, George, the maybe I should have had an apple too. Let me start over again. In 2011, George co-founded Greater Good Studios to use the process and principles of design to heal, be just, and restorative. Previously, he spent 7 years at a global innovation firm before being hired as the first human-centered designer at the Chicago Transit Authority. Since founding Greater Good, he has guided clients and teams through complex projects that honor reality, create ownership, and build power. George will help us understand the mechanics of power and how to wield it with care as we move forward in our community change efforts. He speaks frequently across the US and internationally, and I have not heard George yet. And so both Nick and I are really excited to hear what you have to say, George. Welcome.
That is a lovely intro. Can I just check, Heather, you can hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Nicholas, thank you so much for having me here, Heather and Nick. It's wonderful to be here. I'm also trying to not get distracted with apparently French captions live, which is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So thank you so much for having me here and enabling so much technology to be in this space. I would love to get a chance to speak to this amazing community. I've learned a lot from the times I've been able to present. So thanks again to the hosts who've had me now, I think at least a couple of times. And it's really exciting to be part of this great community. I also want to echo the sentiment that we heard before, that others are kind of be joining this space with curiosity. I also feel like I have so much to learn. And as I've gone and being able to be a designer at our studio, we've learned so much along the way as well. So I'm going to share some slides, and I'm going to try something maybe a little bit new to try to see how we can be perhaps a little interactive while also doing this as a keynote. So there may be parts where I ask some questions into the room, and I also have that window open, so I should be able to see some of the chat as responses in the in that space. So hopefully a little bit of interactivity, and we'll see how it goes. Okay. So if you can give me some grace, I hope to deliver a decent keynote and maybe even share some lessons. Okay, let's see. My name is George A. I'm one of the co-founders and co-executive director at Greater Good Studio. And I think we had some of that bio from before. So I now get to teach regularly as well as be one of the leadership team at the studio. A couple of things about our studio that I think are notable that I think we should set as a ground plane. As a design studio, our number one priority is designing social change. Profitability is in service of sustaining our operations. I feel like sometimes a design business or businesses can get that confused, where perhaps social change is a accidental but convenient outcome. And I think for us, it's very important that we have that be our number one priority. And any other profit that happens can be in service of. But there's also a few different principles that I think founded our business back in 2011, and they're just about as apparent as they were when we first started. Number one, status quo is unacceptable. And actually what we've been finding is that that might be the number one sort of like boogeyman hiding behind, looking behind so many of the problems that we face and the projects that we work on, because the resistance for change can be so strong. Secondly, lived experience is a form of expertise that not only we think is important, but often gets so discounted that we want to make sure it gets a chance to be elevated, to be perhaps even on par with the kind of learned experiences, the things that we tend to put up on our LinkedIn profiles. And lastly, design is transformative. We've seen again and again how the work that we've been so fortunate to get to do has changed us as people, as designers, but also changed communities and our clients through the process of learning about what happens when you open up yourself to the kind of social change that can happen through design. Over the 13 years that we've been in business, we've been able to now contribute across a wide variety of different project types. And those topics you can notice are very sort of like issue agnostic, or sorry, they are issues themselves, but our studio remains issue agnostic. So we have the good fortune of being able to work across all of these different project types with so many sort of like comorbid issues, as it were, around how the kinds of dysfunction and marginalization and disenfranchisement happens not in silos, but happens across the board so many different ways. And we've been fortunate to work with a wide variety of different nonprofits who have inspired us to be able to kind of get to work on some of these topic areas over the last 13 years. And you may be wondering, like, what does a design studio in the social sector even do? And I think honestly, it's been a bit of a struggle for us to work out how to describe it, because if you can see across these project types and these clients, so many of them are different from each other. It's actually kind of hard to describe it in a way that's consistent. So this is like a newer framework, as it were, of what our design work can do. And it is most basic, simple terms. Our process helps us design what should it be, what could it be, and eventually what will it be? And that it can be so many different things, from a new program, a new strategy, a new website, a new name or logo. There are so many different ways in which design can appear. But I think finding it described in terms of should, could, or will is a progression. And I think often when we think of design, in the social sector in particular, it tends to be thought of somewhat even relegated to being surface level. And I think if we are getting a chance to ask these questions of what should it be, changing to then what could it be, and eventually what will it be, you can see that there's a growing level of like clarity and definition. Then if we get, and hopefully we get to do this, asking these earlier questions of should and could, we get to a lot more strategic questions that can be a lot more around what root causes are. Now, the reason we get a chance to did this kind of work, and I think why perhaps we still get a chance to do it each year, is that we're really focused on understanding kind of what is at stake and maybe what are the major levers for change in design. And I find that one of the ways in which just to think about it is to have a clearer understanding of design's relationship to power, one of the meta themes of this conference. One of the ways in which we've been able to think about power at our studio, and actually thankfully too, I'm very grateful to my co-founder here, Sarah, providing a really simplified definition for power that I find so accessible and not just an academic definition. To think of power as the ability to change another person's reality. Now, if you think about it for a sec, that actually might indicate sort of like how your ability to change someone else's reality could be at your fingertips right now. You might be able to send someone a Slack message and have that person's reality change overnight. Or just today, you may have received a message from someone that could have changed your reality for the next 6 months. That ability to change someone's future is an indication of the power you might wield. And I think it's helpful for us to kind of be aware of it. Adjacent to the definition of power that I find so helpful is to think a little about this observation around something we call power asymmetry. The likelihood that power can be lopsided. So when we think about lopsidedness, we find that power is often lopsided in most relationships. And it's rare for us to be in like complete power parity with another party. If I were to maybe give a shout out to maybe why I love design so much, it's partly because there are moments, very fleeting moments when we were in a design session and we're designing something together with a partner, when I feel in actual parity with them, like the power is equally shared, but they don't happen very often. So much of my my career, my life, and actually personal life as well, it's been somewhat dictated by power asymmetry. The idea that I'm in a room with another person and power is often concentrated on one side and not the other. To kind of help visualize this a little more, I've actually kind of drawn this very basic triangle here. And I know in previous sessions when I've spoken at Tamarack, I've used this diagram before, but I find it helpful because it helps exemplify or visualize this phenomena that I think a lot of us have felt, which is when you sometimes get given an assignment or project or hear about something and go, oh my God, I'm never getting out alive. I just have to do this thing now. I don't really want to do it, but I kind of have to. If you've ever experienced that, and I feel like I experience that all the time, that's you on the sharp, pointy end of that triangle. Does that make sense? That's the feeling of being pinned in place by power from another party. And I think, therefore, it's helpful to think about how, when we consider how power symmetry works, that so many relationships are predicated on this relationship between those who have power on the wide end and those who are somewhat pinned in place on the sharp, pointy end. So here are some classical relationships that exist all over the world. And, we could do almost an entire talk just on this, but to consider how many relationships are built on asymmetry, I think it helps us maybe see a little more clearly why certain behaviors go out the way they tend to be. Law enforcement with detainees, doctors to patients, employees to employees, funders to their grantees, teachers to their students, landlords with renters, local government with community, leadership with their frontline staff. So many of these relationships and more have asymmetry baked in. It's almost like we've been typecast into our roles. And therefore, it's almost like we've also been given scripts on what we can and cannot say in those positions, whether we're on the wide end or on the pointy end. Now, this diagram is not, it looks kind of static, but it really isn't. I think it can be quite fluid. But unfortunately, some of us can feel stuck in those positions. And I think it's helpful to say it's not your fault. That was kind of the role that was assigned to you, sometimes at birth or sometimes because of the context. But when you are in a relationship with another person who has great power over you, I want us to do a little bit of an accounting to be able to say, maybe these are all the choices you were given. It can be very challenging to kind of discern how much sort of like blame or a self-narrative that you might have, like, oh, I screwed that up, or I couldn't get out of that situation, or almost to say, I should have done more. Sure, I'm sure there's plenty of things you could have done, but I also think it's only fair to you to assess how much could you have done considering the power you had access to. I find that when I look back on the decisions I have had to make over the years as a designer and now as a leader in our company, I am often thinking about how much power I'm afforded and how much power I can afford my team or our communities that we work with, our clients, because I think that can actually determine the choices one can make. Now, notably, if you think about this asymmetry, this diagram, and the idea that on the wide end there's lots and on the pointy end there's none, our studio, remember, we call Greater Good Studio, don't forget, right? We're all about being finding the man and such, right? Yeah, like this. You would think we are the champions for those on the pointy end, right? And, I think spiritually we feel that way. But if you would place a line that describes where our studio shows up between the pointy end all the way to the wide end, I wonder if you could take a guess as to where we've assessed ourselves. It took me a while to actually admit how far over we really are. We are awfully chummy with those with great power. And I think that's a function of multiple things. One is we're a design studio. We need to have contracts. We'd like to get paid. We need to have the ability to be able to do that work, which means our very proximity to those with great power means that we run the risk of actually making things worse every time we do our projects. It is, I think, a convenient conceit to think that studios that do social design work is somehow free of this asymmetry. We are not. And if anything, we only get projects because they were granted to us, either literally through like a grant from a funder or like given permission to do this work because of our proximity to those with great power. And I highlight this because sometimes the people with the greatest power are the ones that have caused the asymmetry in the bloody first place. They're the ones that caused the situation and are perhaps even exacerbating the situation. And conveniently enough, they might hire a design studio to make things better. Handy, right? So not only is there a risk of making things worse, we also run the risk of providing cover for the harm that is or perhaps even happening right now. So all that being said, I think it's interesting that we, are trying to be clear-eyed about our role, try to take some responsibility for the ways in which we show up. And I think in many ways, as a design studio, actually trying to undo, I think, some of the harmful narratives around how consulting and particularly design may show up in communities who have had harm done to them in the past. So, which is why I said all this because I want to try and see if I can share a few of these principles that we've been learning about how we can try to do some of our work and these principles we learned over many years that I want to be able to share with you around how to maybe disrupt how this asymmetry has been set up for us. And I think if we can present some of these principles, we're going to try this experimental interactive session while giving a keynote to try and see if we can give you an exercise to try and see if we can, practice some of these things. I think it's worth noting that just because I'm presenting this and giving you an exercise, you're not going to fix everything. I think that that's unfair to me and unlikely that you're going to be able to make everything sunshine and rainbows. But I think the idea that we could practice in a small scale for an upcoming moment, I would love to try and see if we can practice what that might look like. Okay, so some principles. We have 5 to present. Number 1, try to see how we can distribute power around the room. Rather than starting with experts at the front of the room, let's see if we can decentralize the meeting so participants can feel more included on an equal playing field. The distribution of power around the room is a conscious choice that I think we have to make. I have a diagram that shows a little more of what I'm describing, but I feel like there is often so much power and knowledge and expertise in rooms that often gets ignored because there are those who have already been granted it. Now, it's a little meta, but you can tell to a degree, I have all the power in this session right now. I guess technically maybe somebody else, maybe Nicholas or Heather could pull the plug on me. So maybe there's a power behind me as well, but I have all your attention, so thank you. And I have to be very conscious of it. But that type of concentrated power is, I think, maybe perhaps what you're expecting, but there are probably lots of moments that you experience where you go, wait a second, I know something about this topic. Why haven't I been given that stage? So what we're trying to see is recognize power is in the room and try to see if we can distribute power around that. Next, share work in progress. So I'm going to just read these again. Rather than sharing a polished presentation, which communicates that this work is actually done, lowering the fidelity of materials sends the message that the work won't be done without community input. When we leave things strategically unfinished, attendees step up to fill in the blanks. I want to be really careful about not saying you should be presenting things that look like crap. That is not the lesson here, okay? Rather, know that you're doing it on purpose and say there are parts that we can't fill in without your help. And actually, this is counterintuitive. The more polished and finished your work looks, the less it invites input. Does that make sense? The more finished it is, if I give you a manuscript that's fully done, typeset, copywritten, and say, what's your sense? Is there any maybe major feedback you want to give? So, oh, hold on, it's too late. Why would I even get, what's the point? Versus I've written some scribbles, I have a couple of notes, I've handwritten some of it. It clearly says I'm not done. And the reason we find this so powerful to share as a principle is that I think it directly challenges one of the major principles around, I think, white supremacy culture and professionalism and other slightly toxic words around what keeps things in place around the status quo is if I don't present it finished, I challenge my own credibility and expert. So I want to say you can still be an expert. But I think that if the more tightly closed you have that image for yourself, the less you're going to expose yourself to new thinking, new ideas, and like we just talked about, the less we're going to be able to distribute the power that's already in the room. Okay, principle number 3. Invite open-ended participation. I think this works so hand in hand with the one we just talked about. Rather than offering a vote on a handful of options, give attendees the ability to contribute in an open-ended way. What do you think of this idea? What other ideas does it spark in you? How would you change this if anything was possible? There's such a tight relationship between question quality or the nature of those questions and the kind of responses you get back that when we are saying, we're actually interested in hearing a range of options that you might have expansively, I think it's a kind and generous and actually respectful invitation. Again, it doesn't presume you don't know anything. If anything, it expects that you in the room know most of it. How would you like to contribute to this open invitation becomes a really interesting, I think, design challenge and a sharing of power that's quite, I think, can be hard for folks because it says, wait, aren't I supposed to be the expert here? Again, you didn't lose any, but you are inviting more expertise to fill in those gaps because you recognize others in the room have it too. How are we doing on these principles? We good? Okay. I have one person in my view. Heather, thank you so much for your positive physical affirmations. It's really thanks so much, Bree. It's helping a lot because I'm not getting a lot of feedback. Yay, Nicholas, thank goodness. Okay, thanks for this crew. This crew is the best. Okay, 2 last principles. Here we go. All right, ask questions that people want to answer. You think this was obvious, right? Don't expect attendees to share your professional expertise. Rather, honor their agency by asking questions that they hold unique answers to. What are your hopes and ambitions for your student? Where does your student shine? Where do they struggle? These are questions based in curiosity, a real genuine sense of I don't know, and I think you might hold some of these answers. And it's okay if you don't either, but I want to talk about it. That nature of the question of shared space and a shared level of curiosity, I think, again, invites people to answer more. And you can tell these are not survey questions. I don't want to waste people's time to say, I've now hosted this session and I'm going to basically do a live Google form. That seems like we missed the point a little. I want to have questions in a room that can only be answered through stories. Our currency as a design studio tends to be stories, and stories are hard to do in a survey, actually by definition. So what we're trying to do is make a room, which we've perhaps done with some of those previous principles, and then in this room, ask questions of quality that engender dialogue and storytelling. Again, that's what we think is important. And what it means is that, I'm seeing some great comments in the chat here. It leads to relationship building. So thank you. Thank you for, I think it's Jaslyn for writing that in there. Okay, we have one more principle and then we're going to switch to the interactive part, okay? Lastly, make it tangible. Rather than only asking people to talk or listen, give them physical artifacts that they can respond to and interact with. Everything up until this moment, I think, could be done by most people who are not familiar with design. This last part is like my desperate attempt at reminding us we're a design studio. I think it's helpful that when we think about designers in the room or people who are maybe getting more exposure to design, there's something about tangible artifacts that tend to kind of shift people from being an intellectual, almost like a floating brain in this accidental skeleton, to a whole person again. Tangibility of artifacts, even if it's just paper and pencil and just post-it notes or a model or a photograph or some printout, activates humans in a way that I think is very difficult unless you've been trained in it. So we tend to bring artifacts and tangible things, and again, going back to an earlier principle, things that have been barely finished, things that are still in progress, engages people in a way that doesn't rely on them to be skilled in a particular technique, have gone to a particular university, gone to a particular type of professional training. It's just basic stuff. And I think making it more accessible through tangibility invites more of the other principles. So I hope you can see that each of these principles kind of lean on each other. And in doing so, I think makes for a very different experience. So with these principles, there's a general trajectory that we're looking for, a thesis we have. We're trying to see if we can shift how rooms are often designed to concentrate power into ones where we have diffuse power, where there's a recognition that the power that's in the room has yet to be activated, rather than we only, pay attention to one person at a time. I think that is a missed opportunity in a lot of these moments that we design or participate in. And I think when we think of ourselves as change makers, I think the idea that we could perhaps have folks planning for rooms to recognize and honor the expertise in the room means we perhaps can lead towards designing the interactions in that room to be a little different. I'm going to maybe, Heather, I'm not sure if I know how to do this, but there's like questions popping up from Maddie that I want to be able to get to at some point. So maybe what we can do is take a pause before the exercise and handle some of the questions. So I just want to do one last slide, which is a summary. So the 5 principles: distribute power in the room, share work in progress, invite open-ended participation, ask questions that people want to answer, and lastly, make it tangible. So I could take a break there and have some Q&A. We could talk. I could answer some questions, and also I can, and if there's still time, run the exercise. Heather, I'm curious. What do you recommend? But I'm very game.
If you I think let's take a pause because there's some really good questions that are coming in. Let's do that.
Sounds great.
So just trying to think. They're coming in so fast. So from Maddie, is the design that George is referring to physical landscape or architectural design?
Right. Great question, Maddie. So we've worked on so many things that are to do with programs and services that actually we don't often do physical, tangible design work much at all. It's just so that so many of our clients are really working at the programmatic level that tends to be the focus of our work. So we can certainly be designing programs and services through this lens. I think there is an opportunity for designing large physical spaces as well, or other things. And I'd say that the reason we bring it up is that architecture as a whole is quite focused on doing things in a very particular way. So there's some challenges you'll face on how architecture is as a culture, as a discipline is often handled, that needs to be a little bit disrupted because there's a lot of power in architecture.
Okay. The next one's from Angie, and this is I was actually looking at your asymmetry, the power asymmetry, and when you showed that slide and you talked about the power agencies here, and I was in public health, so I was a power agency here, but I am a volunteer addict, and I'm over here, and so is it possible to be both? Was kind of my thinking and my question, and Angie is asking about the power asymmetry and making working in municipalities and doing community development work is a huge challenge. So, and often there are outcomes and expectations that must be achieved and reported on. So again, another question I had too was along that time, because when you are getting funding and you're wanting to center and shift power, but you've got time and you've got funding and you've got like the municipal policies and procedures. So any advice?
Yeah.
That's loaded.
So let's go back to the first part, which is, can you be both at the same time? Absolutely. And I think your identity that we are in, the context you're in, might activate certain asymmetries more than others. So because you're a whole human, Heather, you have all these different roles and responsibilities in the world. But as soon as you're in a relationship with another person, like as soon as you're in that meeting, or as soon as you're on that phone call, or as soon as you show up at that community center, asymmetry is present. And I think being conscious of like, do I hold more power now than others in the room, or am I subject to that power? I think doing a quick gut check on like which way do I stand in that moment is helpful. I don't think it's fair to say you are simultaneously powerful and powerless at any one particular moment, because I think so much of the context around you defines that for you. But I think what I find to be helpful is when I look back at so many of the major moments that have been defining in my career or in my life, I often realize, oh, power was like a currency or a lever that was acting in that moment that I didn't pay attention to. And I find it so helpful to go, oh, that's what was going. There was like another element in the room that I wasn't realizing, and it may have set me up to be a certain way. So if anything, the symmetry diagram is about kind of helping you maybe take a better account for what you can really be responsible for versus what you may have taken a narrative from to say, oh man, I should have done better. It's like, well, there's only so much you could have done.
Mm.
You can maybe give yourself a little more grace.
Right. Right.
But to
And what
the
about
other question,
time? The time and funders and the demands.
yeah, those are horrendous. I don't know if I have a lot of advice for you. We are perpetually screwed by those phenomena. Now, at the same time, I think it can be quite disruptive to not have to say yes to everything you get asked. Now, the risk of saying no to things, I can't be the person to determine what that risk calculus is. But I have seen such a default, either from yourself, through learned practice, through the ways in which we've seen how white supremacy culture kind of like emanates everywhere, that saying yes is the default. And to say no and say, like, here's the reasons why, makes it sound so outrageously radical that it really actually perhaps isn't. I think maybe trying to find ways to practice saying no, which, maybe is another workshop we'll do, can be quite a powerful moment. But I think you have to be the one to decide, can you afford that risk? Can you afford saying no in this moment? And I don't think we should like burn everything down, but just be prepared to consider, not everything. I don't have to say yes to everything, and perhaps even questioning, why are we doing it with such a speedy timeline? Have we considered maybe slowing it down? Might help you determine, oh right, someone else is under some other asymmetry. And that might explain why things are being pressured so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you want to switch to give you some time for your, because there's more questions, but I want to make sure we have time for the exercise.
Yeah. So I think what I might do, if it's okay, I appreciate so many questions and feedback that I'm already seeing and hearing. And there's even some in French, which I feel like I'm not going to be able to read. I would love to switch gears a little bit just to this final exercise and see if we can practice a little bit of those principles we just saw. So I think I'm going to go back to that clicker. Look at that, it works. Okay, good. Interactive practice. Here we go. So what I want to try and do is see if we can employ some of those principles and do a little bit of a at your desk exercise. It might be helpful if you can find yourself a pen or a pencil. It's helpful if you have Post-its, but if you don't have Post-its, totally fine. Just like a sheet of paper was totally fine. And I will explain how this will work. But what we're going to do is introduce a couple of maybe design methods and introduce the idea of a framework or so. Okay, Heather, you look very ready. Great. Okay, so what we first want to do is think about a future asymmetry moment. That is something where you feel like you will have asymmetry coming up and present in this next upcoming event. So some examples might be a meeting with your manager, or a staff meeting you're going to attend, or a community event or workshop, or to make it even more personal, like a family meeting you're going to have with your kids. It might be helpful to maybe determine which side of this asymmetry am I on and just note it. I don't want anyone to feel bad about it. Just maybe figure like where am I? And if it's helpful, maybe look in your phone to think of an upcoming moment that is yet to come. So we're looking for a power asymmetric moment where asymmetry is quite clear. That, I mean, again, if you haven't used this term before, you might be thinking, wait, is this an asymmetric moment? Or just think of like a weird upcoming meeting you feel real funky about. That will work too. Okay, so now that we have that, what we're going to do is actually lay out and draw 3 boxes or 3 Post-its that go from left to right. And we're going to put them in the category of before, during, and after. And what I'm asking is to see, and I'm going to give an example of, see if you can describe what you expect to happen in this upcoming moment of asymmetry. And I'm asking in those 3 like timed phases. What happens before? Like what actions will you be doing? What actions do you think you'll do during? And then what kind of actions do you think will happen after? This is like a preview of what you believe is likely to come. There's a later step, which is to try and rethink what those steps will be. But let's try and see if we can get a baseline. So in my example, we're looking at that community meeting, and actually in this case, it's going to be like parents and teachers, or parents and your administrator. So in the before, I set the agenda for what we're presenting to the parents. Seems fair and reasonable. Now in the during, I write, my superintendent welcomes parents, and I present my slides. I take some questions. And then in the after, we act on the actions described in our slides. I'm not asking for any like heavy duty insights or synthesis or anything too profound, just like a straight read. Now, when we try to refresh ourselves on those principles, we're going to try to see if we can actually disrupt perhaps how the actions that you're going to be doing, as we just outlined in our preview there, what might happen if we thought about these principles for this upcoming event. So as a reminder, we're going to see how might we distribute power around the room? How might we share work in progress? How might we invite open-ended participation? How might we ask questions that people want to answer? And how can we make it tangible? I don't think it's fair to say, man, every upcoming moment has to employ every principle. Wouldn't hurt, but I think it's helpful to just like say, how do I get a little practice in this and see if we can employ one or two, if not some of these principles. So in that moment around parents and teachers and administrators, I've tried to see if I can outline maybe a potential future version. Again, just using the simple baseline of before, during, and after. So what might happen when you employ the principles of shifting power? Well, I could call our parent advisory council, assuming you have one, let's say, and ask them for suggestions on what should be on the agenda. That already feels like you're doing things differently, right? And then during the session, again, my superintendent welcomes parents, but then I share the agenda on a whiteboard and ask if there are any new items. Then we share a mix of slides and work in progress for feedback. And then lastly, in the after section, we act on some of the items, but set up follow-on calls to get clarity on the remaining items. I've highlighted in bold some of the actions and some of the assets that we're using to help employ some of those principles. So I'd love to give you a little bit of time to see if you could write the three phases of before, during, and after, but write down what you expect to happen in an upcoming moment of asymmetry, and then try to write it again, employing some of those principles of shifting power. I'm going to go quiet for about 60 seconds, maybe 90 seconds, and see if you can write down a thought or two on how you think your before, during, and after might be impacted when you try to employ some of these principles. And whenever you feel like it, I'd love to see if anybody would maybe share some of how they feel that went. So I guess this is an awkward part. I'm going to go quiet for like 90 seconds. Heather, are there any questions you have about this exercise?
It's I went to my personal and how, like you said, what's coming up? Well, I'm meeting with county staff about a policy.
Oof.
And so I was like, that's where I went, right? And it was like,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Great.
And so I was like, okay, well, how can I help shift the power so that, it's more balanced is what I think I was thinking. And usually before we would go and we would actually share nothing with them. We would so we wouldn't even prepare them with our thoughts. So I would go with nothing so that they don't have the upper hand. And then during the meeting, we would sit kind of like this and wait for them to direct the meeting. And then afterwards, the meeting would basically, the notes would be sent by them from their perspective. And so when you were asking about a change, I was thinking, well, before we could share our thoughts of what we like, what we don't like, and what's missing. And then during, we could actually take part in the agenda and actually offer areas as a, where we see or co-create the agenda. And then afterwards, send our perspective, our thoughts to the county staff. And so that's sort of, I don't know if I did it right.
No, you did it right. I think just examining how things are going today and sort of recognizing, hey, I'm not sure if this is the only way it could happen. You don't even have to be displeased by it. Just like take stock and then
Yeah.
think, well, how would it be different if we looked at it through the lens of power? To a question I see in the chat from Jennifer, which is such a great question, does this activity assume we are the ones with the power advantage? Not necessarily. But I think if you're disadvantaged, like on the pointy end, you might have to do even more work up front to work out how we're going to show up in this space that's already been set up where power is not going to be present, where it's already been set up where we're not going to get much access to it. What this generally states as a larger principle is that if you want power to be shifted, whether you have it or not, it's going to take more time. It's going to take a lot more intention, and you have to slow down. So in the same way that we just talked about how saying yes to things is a yes to projects, yes to, but demands, it's such a steeped cultural norm in the way we do our work. Going quickly is another component that I think is antithetical to social change, antithetical to community power, antithetical to sort of like thoughtfulness, that what we require is often more planning and a slowing down of the rush. Some of the urgency from others that we feel, who then I think exacerbate the asymmetry we feel, the power asymmetry, is fictional. I'm just saying it. It is a fictional urgency that is not real, but we feel like we've been trained and conditioned to think is the only way. So one of these like little ways of being a little radical here is to try to see how we can slow things down and to resist. And I think perhaps employing some of these principles in an upcoming moment of asymmetry can be one of our ways to do so. Thank you to everyone who's had a chance to maybe do some of this exercise. I'm Duncan. That's such a funny comment. Perhaps one day, parenting book sounds great. Oh my goodness, there's so many great comments already coming in. So I'm conscious of the time we have left. I'm wondering if there's a dialogue. Is there someone that we should be speaking to, or should I just start reading our comments? I'm not totally sure here, but I feel like we're already getting a lot of activation here in the comments. Thank you so much. I think it's maybe Elsk writes how familiar this feels to another moment that they've had in the past around wraparound processes. And I do think that is similar because I think what we're trying to do is create a sense for safety, a safety of sharing, which means that you have to be, as the person perhaps holding the room or holding the space, comfortable with not knowing the answers. There's not enough times, unfortunately, for more slides like this, but there are so many times when we have to presume or keep pretending that we know it all. I'd say that's one of the big dirty secrets of being a grown-up. None of us know what we're doing, barely. So I'd love to be able to kind of like have people a little more freely admit that they perhaps might not know everything. And hopefully the context in which you're in can allow for that.
Here's a good question from Sharon. When you're working with people from different cultures and languages, how do you design? Oh, I just lost it. Oh, how do you design the interactions?
I think that's a great question. I don't know if I know. I would say I wonder if you can spend a little bit of time talking to that person, asking, do you guys even do meetings? Just check. Do you? Have you had them go well? No. Oh, can you tell me of a time when things did go well? Like what happened? Like was there food? Was there music? Like like, how did it go well? What I'm employing there is the idea of something called appreciative inquiry, which is assuming that there are already assets and methods in community from that group, perhaps unfamiliar to you. And the idea that they might have already figured out how to get to consensus and figured out how to get to clarity and alignment, that is a human phenomena. It is not exclusive to one group or another. What we keep promoting, though, is a Western, English-based, very verbal, very, very intellectual version. And I think that that's not always compatible with everyone. So I would maybe inquire, how has that gone well for you in this other context, and how much of that can we employ? I think honestly that could be my whole presentation right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's another question. Some specific examples. So if and I'm just thinking in terms of like uh, how you set up the room. Like, do you have any other examples? Any other, you know, ways that we can shift power or stories maybe?
Sure, sure. I mean, setting up the room, it's I think maybe an underrated asset. I think maybe visiting the room ahead of time, understanding kind of like how the room can be physically positioned where seating is a big part of it, and recognizing where will attention be drawn and at what moment. So in some cases it's like slides, and some cases it's going to be like a person on a podium. Firstly, I think assessing what that room is built around, so which means you have to get there ahead of it, and then seeing, is this what we want? If this is incompatible, so typically some of those like concentrated power uh, room setups is incompatible with what you're trying to do. So then you have to check, can we not use this stuff? Are you okay if we don't use the podium? Are you okay if we don't use the slides? Can we put things up on walls? So that preparation can help people go, oh, right, oh, sure, of course you can. Like, we haven't done that before, but why not? You're already starting to disrupt norms by asking those questions, and you're already starting to go, hey, this might be different. Then when people show up in the room, whenever that might be, hopefully they go, oh, wait, this is a different setup. Actually, this is different than last time we had a tribunal and the press was here and everybody went crazy. Like, you can tell that the room is actually signaling a different kind of behavior. So what it really means is just like prepare and try to get there ahead of time.
There's another question here, and I'd like to give an example from, so it says, how can you shift power in a room when you don't hold the power? So another example would be when I was planning a community event, and I had a counselor and some community staff people asking to come to this community event. And so they hold the power because we were talking about changes to our community. And I said, with all due respect, I would love to have you here, but you are able to listen to the dialogue, but I'm not giving you a place or the stage to speak. And I was scared because I just told basically a decision maker, to be quiet. But as soon as the decision maker, like as soon as you give them a platform, it changed the dynamics. And we were in the room to talk about what's great about our community. The other thing too is I set up the room with no chairs because I didn't want it to be like a town hall. And so there's no chairs. And so people kind of walked in and they were like, what's going on? And then I just said, go pick a spot on the wall. We had flip charts and they formed little groups. So it helped to shake up some of the power dynamics because there are very powerful people in the community. And they all kind of picked different spots. They didn't get into a group and go around together, and power would have gone around and then shifted things. And so that's an example of how you can shift power when you don't have power, when you are not the one in power.
Heather, you nailed it. That's such a wonderful example of how to do it well. And I don't know why I'm here presenting. You should you should do this next time. I think that's a great example. Thank you for sharing that and also demonstrating actually how powerful we all are. So I think we're a little bit over time. I just want to send a big, big thank you to all the support team on making this technological marvel happen. It's there's a lot of things going on in the background, and also just to thank the host for having me here, and also this amazing community who've left me with so many great questions. If there's any other, there's maybe one last slide. If I could go back to the presenter view for one last second. My email address and also a link, a QR code to something we call Fireside Chats. So I just want to share that we open our studio up for conversations with people who are outside the studio all the time. They're free to attend. There's no preparation needed, and it helps keep our studio porous, which is a principle of one of the things that we want to do, keeping ideas fresh coming in and out. Sign-ups all done through Eventbrite. So if you can maybe point your phone at that thing, it will get you to the Eventbrite page. And you can always reach out to me, george.a@greatergoodstudio.com. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for having me.
I just want to say thank you, George. And that was such a very important, inspirational keynote. And I want to say thank you so much for sharing everything from your experience. Thank you. I am happy to be welcoming Danya Pastuszek, Tamarack's co-CEO, to set the stage for panel and introduce our speakers.
Nicholas, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Because my camera just gave me that untimely sign that it had disconnected. So is my sound okay? Excellent. Yep. Okay. Well, it is such a joy to be with you all here today. I am joining you, as I often am, from the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Nation. One of the teachings that I've learned from elders from Pikwakanagan First Nation is that knowledge is to be shared, and each person is blessed by the opportunity to teach and to learn and to give and to receive. And I really value that teaching every day, but especially moving into this conversation where I'm really humbled to be here with 4 amazing designers, facilitators, community builders, and humans and leaders who live into that teaching as we continue to explore what power looks like. George, gratitude to you. Just adding on to what Nick said, you have me really thinking about what is the intersection between convening and facilitation and power and design. And I think that's a really important exploration for this gathering and for all the work that the amazing leaders in this room do. You're about to meet Daryl and Sam and Gnarly and Becky if you don't know them already, but I just want to say a few words before you do. When the 5 of us connected about this panel, I heard a real desire to speak to practical ways to understand and change current power structures. I heard on the one hand a desire to speak about what could be and what is possible in this moment of such transformation, and at the same time a bit more practical about what we're experimenting with today and how we're staying accountable to each other and to the goals that we set as we do it. My 7-year-old has taken to a really lovely habit of asking me in the morning what I'm up to for the day. And this morning, as a way of explaining how I think about power to him, I ended up telling 2 stories about shifting power. One is a few years old and one is a bit more recent. And as I was talking with him this morning, it struck me that the ways that we're shifting power build on what we've shifted in the past. And what we might have considered a shift in power a decade ago might feel very status quo right now. And I think that in learning about what's been and what is, we have a chance to be even more expansive about how we contribute in new and different ways to these shifts and shares of power. And I'm excited to be in this conversation, all of you, about what you have seen, what you're seeing now, and what it might enable us to consider power shift in the future. So I will invite Gnarly and Becky and Daryl and Sam to introduce themselves. And to do that in a way that starts with both what they want to share about themselves as people, and then a little bit about how they define shifting power dynamics in their work. So Becky, if it's okay, let's start with you. Grateful to have you here. Would love to have you introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about how you define shifting power dynamics and why it's so crucial for the outcomes that you're trying to activate.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really honored to have been invited. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to go first. I am from Atakakup Cree Nation, and I'm also a 60s scoop survivor. So it gives me perspective of doing the work that I do. I'm an anti-racist practitioner, and I have worked at various different levels of government, both in colonial institutions or only in colonial institutions. So I've worked for provincial, federal, and municipal government in the past, and most recently have the opportunity to be able to work in collective impact. And I do want to be able to say that I am first an anti-racist practitioner and not a collective impact specialist, but have found the application of the collective impact really important in being able to identify the nature of the shift in power that we're looking to be able to happen in this particular region. So we're working in a region where we recognize and understand that racism is very, very entrenched, not only psychologically, but historically as well. So shifting the hierarchical power to be able to create outcomes in this particular region, what we find to be very, very important, first of all, is being able to be honest and truthful about the nature of the problem. So we look at colonization really as the nature of the problem, right? And recognize that our colonial institutions are replicating the same nature of harm that we are trying to shift away. So being honest and truthful that the nature of the organizations were really designed around genocide. And that the harm is actually still happening, because we can see in all of our institutions that the outcomes, even though we have, I think, honest and genuine intentions to be able to create better outcomes year after year after year, what we are recognizing is that the outcomes are staying the same, even though we have the best intentions of being able to create better outcomes for those of us who are the furthest away from opportunity. So in this particular project, what was important is that not only, first of all, that we recognize that we are not looking at creating another initiative, that we want to recognize for the specific purposes of truth and reconciliation, that downstream initiatives are not going to solve an upstream problem. So being honest and truthful about the origins of the problem, that white male human supremacy is the nature of the transformation that we want to shift away from. So recognizing the history and the context of the region that we are working in specifically was also very important. Recognizing the concepts, being very specific about the vision. We know that there's a lot of change, that the community wants to see happen. But understanding specifically how that change is going to happen. In the region, I've often made the analogy about, everybody wants to have change, I think, or that we recognize that change is necessary. But we don't know how, in all of the messages and all of the approaches that we're getting, how to actually achieve that change. So I've made the analogy often of about turning the lights on, and at least we all know that we're looking in the same direction. So having that common vision is really important. And the next step, I think, is recognizing the approaches that we already have and knowing what tools that we have to be able to work towards achieving that common vision, so that we're all working collectively together. Somewhat of an important factor is recognizing that, yes, change is important, but that we're actually looking at becoming butterflies and not just becoming better caterpillars. So recognizing the collective vision that we do have that doesn't look at, deficit-based approaches. And one of the ways that we have found in this specific instant about shifting power is really identifying where you are measuring the value. Right? And there's multiple different ways of doing that. But how do we recognize that the power is shifting if we're not measuring those who are the furthest away from opportunity. So recognizing and measuring the value of those who are the furthest away from opportunity and the safety that they are feeling in terms of their interaction within institutions that have significantly placed them that have placed them in harmful situations. So actually measuring the harm from people who have been in positions that have significantly placed them in harm's way is one way of being able to recognize the shift of power away from traditional and historic hierarchical structures of power. I'd like to stop actually here to see what other panel members' thoughts are on the nature of shifting power before I continue as well. Thank you.
Becky, thank you so much. You've asked some you've described a process that I think leads us to some really powerful questions. How will we identify the root causes? How will we know that the change has happened? How are we measuring the value, the process of the change? How are we measuring the impact on those who have been most harmed historically in this process and others? Thank you so much for that. Gnarly, could we turn to you to say hello and respond to the question around how you think about power in the context of your work?
Absolutely. So my name is Gnarly Dapilos, born and raised here in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories on Chief Tragie's territory. Very proud to be able to call this place my home and very welcoming to my family who originated from the Philippines and had found themselves here and have since then called this place their home as well too. And yeah, I guess to me, shifting like power dynamics is understanding, shifting control back to sort of like the people who are directly impacted by kind of like decision making or power and things like that. I think with my work around with the CBYF Communities Building Youth Futures work around working with young people and creating better outcomes for them, I think giving them the opportunities, the space, the support needed to sort of be the ones that kind of lead and be part of the change and be part of the conversation. And just thinking back to kind of like Becky's points, like I think, white supremacy culture is a really big role, plays a big role in sort of the constructs and the where power is and how it can shift and needs to be shifted. I think that, yeah, there's so many ideas that I have right now about, and just like Becky gave some really good points that I want to say as well too. But yeah, ultimately, I feel like it does come down to sort of challenging those colonial constructs, decolonizing the way we approach things. I know for my personal culture, in the Filipino culture, we have this concept called bayanihan, which is everyone working together towards common goals or common good or working for other people. So this idea of collectivism, I think, has also been diminished over time through colonial constructs. And I think that distribution of power within the collective, I think that's a way that we can help combat sort of like the individualistic kind of like notions of power and like where power lies in a small few versus the greater number. I think there's strength in numbers. I believe that, ultimately the shift in power is, at least how we're speaking of power right now, like currently the power is in sort of like people who are thriving in sort of like those colonial kind of like constructs, who control policies, money, resources, things like that. And then distributing that to those who are impacted, obviously, by the decisions of those decision makers. So for me, it's really involving and engaging and also educating. I think education around this topic, this language that we're using, so the people who are impacted by this can also engage in this language that we're using as well too. I think that's a big piece, because sometimes we use these words, they go over people's heads, and next thing you know, we don't have as much numbers in terms of the people who can speak within a discussion like this, around a topic like this. So for me, creating structural supports, creating the environments for capacity building, and getting people the opportunities to be able to speak, think, reflect, and advocate around topics like this, I think is an area that I see when it comes to shifting power. So especially like when we look at our young people, creating the opportunities for our young people to, because eventually the young people become the old people, the us people, older people, individuals, right? So starting it, part of their environment as they shape into the individuals that they want to be, I think helps with, I guess, distribution or shifting of the power dynamics that I guess is needed for change.
Thank you so much, Gnarly. I remember, I think the first time I met you, you had designed an activity for young people across the communities building these futures network to come together in art and song and creativity. And I think you have, throughout your time at that network, really demonstrated exactly what you're talking about. Thank you as well for the expression that power is with those who are already thriving. That will stay with me. We need to shift that. Daryl. Hello, great to see you. Would welcome you to say hello and answer our question too.
Yes, glad to be here with you all. I am coming to you from Kansas City, Missouri. That's where I currently live. I was born in London, England, and both of my parents are Jamaican. So immigration is deeply a part of my story, my people's story. So I'm just glad that I could be here to share just a little bit of what I get to do here in Kansas City, Missouri. So question on how I define shifting power dynamics, a little bit about my work and how I do that and why I believe this work is critical, is I come at this from a little bit of a different angle. I guess the philosophy of practice is asset-based community development, which believes that everybody has inherent power. So there are structural things at play. There are communities and individuals that are stripped of political power, economic power, but within every single one of us, there is the ability to create. I believe it's Dr. Martin Luther King that talks about power as purpose. And so part of shifting these power dynamics, how we can define that is by helping a community, helping a people discover their purpose and discovering what they're passionate about. And many times that comes from what is wrong, right? That comes from what is broken in society. And one of my mentors talks about our calling sometimes comes from our woundedness, sometimes comes from our pain. When I think about shifting power dynamics, it's almost like two sides of the same coin. It's like we discover our power, our purpose, sometimes by engaging in what's broken in society. And this is crucial because when I think about my own story growing up in South London, I learned about this form of community engagement from my mother. So I watched my mother engage in community in significant ways and build power with neighbors. And it's so interesting where I would see this base building take place was in our laundromat around the corner from our apartment. So we would walk to the laundromat, all the dirty clothes, and I would sit, and the ladies would be talking about the different decisions, different things happening in community, how we can support one another, how we can transfer resources to one another. And we were all in low-income public housing. So though we didn't have economic wealth, growing up, I was in an environment where I witnessed women who understood that they had something to contribute to one another and to the children in the community. So that was like a seed that was planted in me at an early age. So now I think Nali, you had mentioned creating environments. What it looks like for me, like I have been thinking a lot about this idea of creating environments and how important that is. The neighborhood that I live in, we can look at, if we want to talk about structures, my neighborhood was intentionally created to kind of be this environment that breeds hopelessness, violence, and poverty. But within that place, me and some neighbors are working together to create an environment to reverse that, right? To flip the narrative, to flip the script, even within that. You know, so our neighborhood, our zip code has the lowest life expectancy, 64128. But within our zip code, we're seeing little pockets of life, celebration, joy, abundance take place, because what we're doing is we're creating these small environments from front porches in our community center where people are beginning to see one another. I think that's the first step in figuring out like purpose and power in a place that is created to breed hopelessness, poverty, violence, hostility towards one another. When you shift that and you try and create a space where we now actually see each other. And then once we see each other, we recognize that one another have gifts, that one another, we have purpose. And then we start wrestling with the question that we wrestle with in asset-based community development. What can we do with what we have? So that's some of the work that we've been doing. So this idea of shifting power dynamics, it begins with us creating these environments in our neighborhoods where we can see one another. And it's so cool. One of the environments, I was just talking to a group about this weekend. So my daughter just turned 10 last week. And one of the environments we created was a play group. There was nowhere in our community. There was nowhere in our community for young families to gather. So a group of us created that, you know, an environment. And what's so beautiful is 10 years later, all of those kids are like best friends, right? So we're seeing these generations of young people discover their purpose, their power. This village is being created and is flipping the script on these environments that were created that kind of cultivate poverty, death, and violence. You know, we're seeing this all take, you know, this change in radical ways. So it's crucial. I believe that, you know, the results, the outcomes of this is important, right? Equitable outcomes are so important in the work that we do. And what we're seeing is because, like I mentioned about the kids, a friend of mine, and some of you may know him, Diamond Hodges, he talks about 100-year work. And so that's something that's gotten into my mind is it's like, okay, in this work that I'm doing, in these environments we're creating, what's the fruit of this thinking like 100 years from now? You know, so when we focus on the equitable outcomes now, it's like, okay, generations from now, you know, what are we going to see from this work? So I'll leave it at that, but yeah, grateful for the opportunity to be here and share a little bit of my story.
Thank you so much for painting this arc of the impact of your grandmother and her generation on our generation, and then the way that the young people are now interacting. And thank you for reminding us about the role of hyperlocal and the role of person-to-person relationships in this work of power sharing and shifting as well. Sam, over to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. My name is Sam Pastuszek. I'm an inclusive innovation practitioner and a product owner at TD Bank, and I am calling from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Chinootan peoples, or as other would know us as Kitchener, Ontario. The thing about Kitchener, before we go into it, is that we're actually part of the Haldimand track, and there's different blocks of the Haldimand track that are part of it. So we're actually in block 2, and you can actually understand where you are in place. So sometimes when we think about a relationship to treaties, they feel very big. And in the Haldimand tract, it feels very small because you know exactly where you are in that place and the relation that you have to the peoples and how it was there. And even in the way that the Haldimand tract is set up as a territory, is it's 6 miles deep on each side of the Grand River from tip to tail. So you even have placemaking that is a part of that conversation in there. So it's just part of some of the pieces that have come through. Is you very much are contextualized to where you are in those spaces. As an inclusive innovation practitioner at an institution like a bank, I often act as a translator. And the way that we think about that in translation is how do you actually describe these tools or these concepts in a way that fit within a product lifecycle? And so I work with product teams and design teams and developers, and how do we talk about things within a framework that everyone understands and setting it in a way that everyone feels like they could be part of that conversation. And one of the things that we set out is we have a mission statement. So between the digital accessibility team, which is a team that I work very closely with, and then the team for inclusive innovation, we started with a mission statement. And so that mission statement is that everyone has a right to accessible banking, and that we want to create experiences that elicit a sense of belonging from all current and potential users, reflecting their unique needs, motivations, and experiences. And we were able to frame that in a way that everyone who came to the tables that we were at, everyone who was looking at future solutions, the customers that we talked to, our own colleagues, we centralized the conversation with an agreement of where we were working from. And so that was really important when we're looking at shifting dynamics, is actually starting from the same page and saying that this is where we're going to start together and work towards this future as a group. Inclusive innovation is a really interesting space to be in. So we say that it's at the intersection of invention, recognition, and inclusion. So invention is this idea of foreseeing the future. There's a lot of really scary technologies that we need to be aware of in innovation space, and how do we foresee that future? Recognition is seeing the problem. So what are the barriers? Who is being denied access? Where do we have opportunities to actually make lasting changes? Is it a change that is in a small local space, or is this something that could change the entire systemic way that we're thinking about this problem? And then the last is inclusion, and it's this idea of being seen, so that you can have that everyone who is a part of this process feels like they are recognized within it, that they are given agency, that they are treated like the partner that they are in that conversation. And a lot of this has to do with the way that we've changed the way of having this conversation. And so for me, I've been doing inclusion work for a very long time. I know like 15 years long time. And then the way that we think about this is that when we go into like a more traditional product or program design or service design, they're often thinking about, oh yeah, we'll consult people. We'll invite them in to get their feedback, and then we'll go off and fix it and whatever. And then maybe 4 months down, we'll consult them again, and that'll be it. There is just this idea that we should be moving away from this. So, from the standpoint that we're leaving from what we would call user-centered design, that's the consulting piece, to co-design. And co-design means that individuals with those lived experiences are actually part of the team that is creating the solution. It's no longer, we'll consult you. It's no, you're a part of our team as we have these conversations. And the idea is that in the future, the goal of inclusive innovation is actually user-created design. So those who actually are experiencing the barriers are given all of the tools that they need, the support they need, the agency they need to actually design the solution itself, and everyone else just clears the way for that solution to move forward. And that's a really interesting space to be in, having some of these conversations about shifting power. I did not, as I've gone through this process, it's been really interesting to see the shifting power dynamics as we've moved from this idea of consulting people to having lived experience as a part of our teams, to the future of lived experience designing the solutions itself. And that is a long process to have in an institutional setting, but it's been incremental shifts to continue to have those conversations. I think that's a space that is not often. It can feel like you're chipping off at an iceberg, for a lack of a better metaphor, that you spend this time thinking that, we've been working on this for a very long time, and in the work that I've seen it go through. But when you step back, you can actually see how much of this has changed. This is how we're seeing larger groups participate in this, and more importantly, we're seeing accountability practices being put into this. So as we see institutional organizations that are going into this work, having those accountability cycles is starting to be a core piece of it. And I think that's where a lot of this shifting power is. It's not just bringing people to the table, but being accountable to the people that are at the table as you continue to make those shifts within the power structures.
I'd just like to add, actually, as well, I thank the other panel members, and I think it's a really important perspective to recognize is that these power forces that are at play, the status quo is very strong. So we have been working at trying to shift outcomes for an extremely long time. But the forces of the status quo are very strong, and they are designed to reproduce the identities that we see being reproduced consistently over and over and over again. So I think that what it points to, and what the point that I wanted to make was the importance of recognizing that systemically, the systems are harmful. But those of us who are working in systems, we don't always recognize the harm because we are very well-meaning folks at the same time who want to see, positive change for the better. But we don't always recognize that our intentions aren't working for the best of outcomes, which points to, I think, the need for accountability, lived experience, but also trauma-informed, resilient policy. Not only do the policies that are currently in place actually contribute to the harm and contribute to unequal outcomes, we have to actually recognize the policies, the barriers that are within those policies that are contributing to current outcomes, but also recognize policies that need to be put in place to actually stop the harm and to support ongoing policy, regardless of whether or not there is political change, political will, political interest, social will, economic will, but trauma-informed resilient policy, I think is what I wanted to add to the brilliant conversation that other panelists have also had.
Becky, thank you so much. Daryl, Sam, Gnarly, anything else you want to add into around this question of how we define and think about power shifts before we move into our next set of questions?
It's something that Becky just mentioned about accountability. And I was just thinking about a conversation I had with a pretty big philanthropic organization here locally, and the somewhat lack of accountability, but a lot of funding that has gone out, and with very little transformation. And I remember asking one of the officers in one of the program officers in all the years of this individual being, on the front lines of providing these grant dollars and all of these programs and all of the events and just all of the activity, like, has there been any positive change? And they just looked at me and they said, no, none whatsoever. So Becky, as you were speaking, that just made me think about like when people who aren't closest to these challenges, if they're not speaking into it, if they're not shaping it, if they're not driving it, if they're not determining where the dollars go, if they themselves aren't being compensated for their time and their expertise, right? Nothing is really going to change. And we'll keep throwing dollars at problems that were here before we got here and will be here long after we're gone. So
I think it's very important to recognize the importance of people who are invested in the outcomes, right? They're invested. We are invested in the betterment of our children's lives as mothers, as Indigenous women in our communities. We are invested in change. So yeah, that's really an important point too.
Wonder if we could stay on this topic of accountability, and maybe I'll use some of George's fantastic language from before. What would any of you say about the accountability mechanisms that should be in place or that you've seen be in place? You've named some, the closeness of lived experience experts to design, implementation, and evaluation, trauma-informed policies designed to stop the harm of existing systems. But I'm curious if there's other things that you've seen be present that represent accountability or that could be present that we could imagine it too.
Just real quick, just something, because I'm actually working through this right now. Is this fresh in my mind? Is folks with lived experience being able to access resources easily without having to jump through, a million hoops. Everything being accessible language-wise. Just even a grant application, not having to go through a huge process for that, but it's a simple form, one page, whatever the case may be, or something written in various languages that are more accessible. Just so those are some of the immediate things that come to mind.
I think accountability is both in the small things and in the big things, and how you show how you respond or your responsibilities to very small actions sets the stage for how you will respond to big actions. So when we've been working on solutions where we've had individuals who we're building trust with, I put actually a lot more accountability into the small things that we start with to showcase, hey, I said I would come back with this. I have come back with this. I said that I would do Y. I have come back and I have completed Y. And that way, as we start working towards some of those larger boulders of change, we've already started to build on that foundation of my word is true. And I've demonstrated that with small things, and I've started to demonstrate it with as bigger things move up. And so I know that if you're joining us virtually and you're like, I can only think of like really big things that are accountabilities, think about the small things, like saying, I said I would find us a room for this meeting. I found us a room for this meeting. I didn't put that on you. I did the work that I said I was going to do. I said I would source out the honoraria. I have come back with saying that I've sourced out the honoraria because those are tangible actions that demonstrate your commitment to the group that you're working with. And that will start building the trust that is needed to have some of those larger transformational pieces.
Yeah, to add to that, I think I think relates to that transparency piece, that piece about humility, being humble enough to accept that, what, like, if I'm not going to do something or can't get something done or something doesn't, it's not working or has to be done different, are we humble enough? Do we have the humility to say, okay, maybe we suck at this and maybe we have to do a different approach, or we have to, take our own accountability in that, okay, there has to be a change instead of trying to kind of like reshape something that clearly isn't like working or something like that, right? Like I think accepting and being able to move forward and accept what wasn't working.
I think something else too that we don't talk about enough, and in a lot of cases, that it takes a lot of courage for organizations and institutions to come to the table. I mean, they ought to. I'm not letting them off the hook for sure. There's a lot of harm that has happened, truly, and ongoing harm. But it does take a lot of courage for organizations to be able, the leadership of those organizations to be able to come forward to recognize, to say, look, our organization has done a lot of harm. It takes courage to be able to recognize and to be transparent, because we know that all of our organizations, all of them, and it's not picking on them, it's the truth. They all consistently are ongoing, causing harm in society. We recognize that the laws had to change in Canada because there is harm happening. We recognize that we need to transform. but for the leadership to be able to come forward, it is quite difficult. So I think that we have to recognize too that it takes courage for leadership to recognize we are not doing a good job in the way that we need to. We know that we need to be able to transform, but we don't know what to do, because in my observation of doing anti-racism, for the most part, there is not only fear, but there is a high degree of ignorance. But yet the leadership in organizations are expected to know what to do. So to be able to say, we don't know what to do, is, I think, very difficult for leadership in organizations to be able to do, to then say collectively, how do we do this with people who have been devalued, not only historically, but psychologically within those systemic narratives. So it does take a lot of courage as well at the same time. And we're just not seeing that, courage step up in leadership. We're seeing leadership actually work to be able to support the status quo. So really supporting the courage within organizations and leadership towards that relinquishing of power is what we also need to be able to see, right? Is that just because you are being accountable doesn't mean that we are attacking your organization. And I think that we don't talk about that enough. In a lot of ways, we're not attacking the leadership that is upholding those organizations of white male human supremacy, right? We are attacking the white male human supremacy of the organizations, not the leadership within the organizations themselves.
Thank you all so much. This connection between humility and courage, this idea that accountability is not meant to make anyone feel bad. It's not necessarily a negative. It's a feature of what we need to have in our systems if we're going to actually get to transformation. There's a theme emerging across the course of the day that another member of this Tamarack network, Sunshine Chen, who's a creative and a YouTube producer and an author, an amazing human, he's described it as there are no small projects. And that's something I heard come up so far in your comments. I heard it come up in the belonging workshop this afternoon. I heard hints of it this morning. But everything we do matters and is advanced outside of the status quo into something different. I'd love to go back, now that we've talked a little bit about accountability, to this issue of systems of support, Gnarly, that you raised before. And I wonder if you or anyone could speak a little bit to the role that youth or other people from equity denied communities play in driving structural shifts in power, and then how larger institutions and larger partnerships that may include large institutions can really support their efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. I can kick off this conversation here. So in the previous work that I was doing with the Communities Building Youth Futures Initiative, it was really centered around, improving youth outcomes regarding, employment and education. And but as we, engage the young people and have them at the center of, what will this look like, they really shaped kind of like where the priorities were going to be. And it was everything like to improve their outcomes weren't necessarily just the education and employment pieces, but it's the other things, the social support networks, the connections, the personal identity, the other things that kind of like, a lot of people may take for granted or unaware are the things that make them thrive in society. Those are the things that like, some youth may not have access to. And so one of the things that we recognize, especially when, you want to put, a group of people or like, young people at the forefront of something, it is a big burden. Like it is, it's a big thing to be like, oh, hey, by the way, you guys are leading this now, go do something. And it's like, I think with anyone, like if anyone told you, hey, you're going to go lead something, your immediate gut reaction is, oh shit, that's like, oh, pardon my language. But that's like it's a big thing. Right. And so understanding, obviously, and, when I started the project, I was 25. So I was on the upper end of their definition of youth. And I've kind of like grown out of my youthness, I guess, through the initiative. But in being a young person and kind of like having this expectation to lead and stuff, sometimes you forget about what young people want to do and how young people are and what, the things that go on in their lives too. So you can't dismiss the fact that they are a young person. They want to do all these other things. They want to hang out with friends. They want to do all these things that maybe not related to your work, which is, hey, we're trying to improve young people outcomes and stuff. And so I think without putting the entire burden on young people, part of the initiative, was really, okay, how can we create, back to that point of environment, create kind of like a structure or space that allows young people voices to still be very impactful and meaningful in driving things. So one of the things that we kind of like try to develop, and it's still going on right now, is our Hajon Eklete Letije, which is Williday, and it translates into we are all connected, or we all learn and grow together. And it's this network of community partners who want to buy into this idea of supporting youth initiatives or youth in our community. And so creating partnerships with organizations that have the resources, that have kind of like the things that can support young people and support young people's ideas, having them on board kind of like helps propel some of the work that is sort of like needed to kind of like make the changes that we want to see, that young people want to see. So creating that network, creating that environment for young people, that's sort of like what we've done here. And again, supporting the network, supporting that support the young people, also building the capacity of the young people as well too. So with anything that is multifaceted in terms of its complexity, also requires some like multifaceted sort of like areas for solutions as well too. And so covering kind of like the organizational aspect of it, in supporting young people, but also helping them create space for young people to build the capacity of leadership and things like that. Because we want youth to be leaders, but sometimes, it's hard to just want to publicly speak and they don't have that training. So we get an organization that says, hey, we do public speaking training. You guys want to help out? And that's how we build kind of like the capacity, and hope to build the capacity in our community. So having the buy-in with different organizations, I think is an important piece.
Thanks so much, Gnarly. So I hear capacity, I hear the power of the network as well. I hear the power of supports for the work and many other things. Any other thoughts on this question of what the systems of support that you would like to see be in place or that you see in place? I'd like to mention.
I think it's important that we mention, or I would like to mention, the idea of allyship. And I think that, recognizing, especially now, and I think it was Gnarly who said before now that we are becoming older. So I recognize in doing work, and in particular, it's so important to be able to, as we evolve, get the input of youth, right? And to be very authentically inclusive, not just, superficially consultative of the youth table that happens to be there. But actually incorporating, through the evolution of the society, what do we want to see? How do we want to support youth in the world that they want to see? But doing it in authentic ways, because I know that we can have a tendency as older people to look and say, oh, well, we did that in the 90s and it didn't work, and then want to be able to come in and take control. So I think that it's really important that we talk and recognize, the role of allies. That it isn't about taking control, that it is truly about recognizing our own bias and recognizing the support and empowerment, and make sure that our processes are there to authentically provide that empowerment and really shifting the power dynamic in authentic and real ways. And recognizing, our own identities around that and what it means, to be an ally or to be an accomplice or to be, all of these different roles that we play and those narratives and the power that is assigned to them. I think is important that we recognize what those roles are.
So I've had the opportunity to work with youth again. I took a pause for a while, but 3 years ago, I started gathering a group of youth in my home, and kind of outgrew that space. But I have really enjoyed this idea of kind of an experiment to co-create a space with young people, to see the community and the world through their eyes, and just recognizing, at least where I live, it's really hard to be a teenager right now. It's really hard to be a child right now. A lot of my young people are kind of walking through life scared. They're wondering if adults really care, really want to hear what they have to say, even with all of these, these events where we want to get feedback from kids. It's like, do they really care? And that's one of the first things kids in my neighborhood told me and my wife when we moved in. It was like that they don't care about us. So this idea of power, it's like, how do you help young people discover their sense of power when they don't ever feel heard? It's kind of like there's a proverb I say all the time, like it takes a village to raise a child, but then the flip side, when the child isn't embraced to feel its warmth, or they'll burn the village down, this kind of idea. And so we're really seeing that in our community. Like literally just today, a minor was charged for the murder of another minor. Right? Last week, a 16-year-old was murdered in my community. So this work is like crucial to create spaces for young people to discover their gifts, step into their purpose, co-create. It's funny, you had mentioned public speaking. I have an intern, his name's Lyrics. So I pay him and to basically spend 5 hours a week with me. So we hang out every week and he helps us lead this initiative that we have. And he called me and he said, well, I want more work. And I was like, well, what do you want to do? You got to tell me, what do you want to do? So he comes back with this public speaking idea, but he called it public comfortability. Right? So it's public comfortability, helping young people speak in public. So he shared this with me in the library. I literally walked him over to the library staff and I said, hey, Lyrics, tell him your idea. So we told him the idea and the library liked it so much that we're going to pilot it at the library. Right. So just this idea of helping our young people see like, hey, the ideas you have, I'm not just trying to take them, like we're actually going to do something with these ideas and help improve our community. So just wanted to add that, like, I feel like this, our young people aren't the future, they're now. I feel we need to get beyond that mindset of like, they're the future. It's like, no, they're now. And if we're trying to figure out how we can set them up for the future, then we're already too late.
Something I want to add to that, what Daryl was saying, kind of like triggered an idea in my head when you said kind of like the gifts and values of young people, and how we nurture that. I think it's a very powerful thing. If we're talking about shifts in power, I feel like a lot of people are most powerful when they're in their element. Like if, man, I'm a rock star when it comes to like just drawing, or I'm a rock star when it comes to doing beadwork or making music or something like that. Like when I'm in my element and I can grow and be able to just do that and thrive and make a living off that, I think the power within me, I think it's really big. And I think that's an area, whether it's the arts or anything kind of like creative that you can then make a living out of, but you're in your element, and helping young people or anyone really identify what that element is for them, I think is a very powerful thing. And I think that's one of the ways that we can really engage those who maybe don't feel that they have power or something, or they don't feel like they're being heard or being seen, but we give them the space to discover that passion, that thing that makes them unique, that makes them them. Then it's the whole world, you're your whole world at that point, and being able to thrive from that. And I think that's how we can kind of uplift individuals and hopefully see kind of like shifts in the world as they kind of like grow into that over time. But it just made me think about cultivating people's passions, things they're really into, and just how powerful that is, because I know it's played a really big role in my life. And I've seen in some young people's lives too, of, once they find their element, their avenue, and, we just support them on their journeys to making decisions that coincide with getting to where they want to be, defined by them. Because when it's defined by you, that's powerful.
There's a couple questions coming in on the chat. One is around leadership and one is around policy. So let me ask both of them, and then if you could each respond to the one that feels the most alive for you, that would be a nice way of recognizing what our amazing partners and colleagues and friends in the audience are looking at right now. So the first question about leadership. You've talked a lot about the need for leaders to foster this culture of humility and courage as a way to redistribute power within their institutions and other systems that they have a lot of influence within. How can leaders do that? How can leaders go about fostering that sense of humility and courage? And perhaps what can leaders do for each other to uplift each other in that? The other question coming in is around policy. There is a real interest in the phrasing of resilient policy, Becky, that you offered us. And folks are curious to know a little bit more about what that means and a little bit more about how we can go catalyzing those resilient policies. So over to all of you, wherever your interest takes you.
So I might start with the leadership piece on here. And I think, I think it's important to recognize that we're all leaders in our own right. And so what we're looking for here is what we have to practice, what we preach here. One of the things that I think is really important is being able to recognize those spaces of where we don't know and where we have to seek for those answers. And so when we're looking at that, how do you build up it's not necessarily this idea of starting from a space of not knowing, but a sense of curiosity and finding what the answer is and how do we get to that together. I think it's also really important in that way to also think about recognition-led leadership or gratitude-led leadership. I work with a lot of young people, and I think it's really important, especially when you're young in your career or young in your journey within the place, that you're recognized for the work that you do. And so before I go in and present on an idea, I actually recognize everyone who was in the team, a part of it, and I highlight the work that they did. Because in that type of leadership, you're also looking at sponsorship, right? You're sponsoring that person. You're giving them the ability to say they actually should be leading their own projects. This is actually their passion project. This is what they're, as Gnarly was saying, having some of those conversations with people in, we call them pods, but people in my pods being like, what actually makes you excited? What were you working on? What can I highlight? How can I let someone else know that that's the skill that you have that can foster that next step, right? And so that's part of it, is understanding your role in the sponsorship of it. I think also going back to the idea of humility and transparency when it comes to leadership, the best thing about working in a field where there's not always answers is that automatically some of our leaders have had to be like, that's a great place that we have to explore. We have no idea what that implication is. But how do you bring that curiosity? How do you bring that ability to try and fail and learn and grow and try again and fail and learn and grow? That's the muscle that you have to be able to have. Iterative processes. You don't have to be perfect on the first go. You just have to try. And that leadership element is necessary when we're looking at transformative work. I've seen a lot of organizations that I've supported in the past or I've worked with in the past in previous roles, that the fear of failure prevents them from starting. And you just need to start, and you can be honest that you're like, we're starting and we have no idea how far we're going to go on this, but this is the first step we can be. And again, be accountable to that first step and then grow from that first step, because you know what's worse than failing? Not trying.
I think so well said. I think so well said that well, the nature of our organizations are really not conducive to change at all. And so the expectations of the leadership in these really unprecedented times, in a lot of ways, the violence, the homelessness, we're seeing it, these problems, significant problems, I think that are very difficult to be able to solve, but supporting education, I think I wanted to be able to add as well. Is to support education to really have a solid foundation of understanding the nature of the problem, because there are so many that we could get lost in identifying, effective ways to be able to address that nature of the problem. If I could just add, actually, in addition to that, I know that there was a question about resilient policy. And I think the major issue is about resilient policy, meaning that it isn't up to the nature of the leadership per se, but it is resilient in that it doesn't change if the leadership happens to change. Is that the policy is tied to the outcome and not the intent. And I think that it's really important that we recognize the difference between that.
In our closing round, I wonder if you could each share a call to reflection or a call to action or some encouragement that you'd like to leave our audience with here. And I know that there's a lot of interest in the how of all of this complex work among our friends in the audience. So as well, if there are any teachings or books or pieces of music or poems or podcasts that you'd encourage people in our audience here to spend time with to continue to evolve these issues around power. Would love to hear that too. So final calls to reflection or action, and then anything that is helped your own learning that you'd like to pass along to our audience.
Maybe I'll start. If you are interested in looking at how you can take inclusive innovation practices into your own work, I highly suggest starting with Liberatory Design Thinking by the National Equity Project. It is a fantastic resource. It goes from this idea of how you start with these cycles of understanding that are tailored into a notice and reflect context. And so when you are doing these notice and reflect pieces, it's, practicing your self-awareness, seeing the context of the systems you design within, exploring the histories, and develop your equity-based identities within that space. It's fantastic. And then you also reflect on your team health, your design intentions, the impact of the design to your communities, all these pieces. It is a fantastic resource if you want someone to guide you in the activities or the way that you're thinking about becoming that practitioner within your own space.
The only thing I would share, I don't necessarily have a resource, but I'm just still thinking about our conversation around leadership. And I just feel like we're in a leadership crisis. Like, we're just not well, we're not taking care of ourselves. We are functioning with very little rest. Like we're overwhelmed. It's like I would just encourage us, as my final words, is to figure out how we can kind of pour from, don't pour from an empty cup. What fills you? So just trying to figure that out for yourself, like what fills your cup, and then pour from that place. Yeah, because there's a lot of work to be done. But if we are doing this work from a place of exhaustion, if we're doing this work from a place of anger, it's not gonna bear the fruit that we really want it to have. And I feel like if we do this work from a really unhealthy place, we might be replicating the same unhealthy patterns that we're fighting against. So my encouragement to us is just like, Let's just, as leaders, let's do our work on ourselves first, and let everything else be an overflow of that.
Sam, Gnarly, Becky, Daryl, thank you so much for what you do in community. Thank you so much for all that you offer this work. Thank you for this time that we spent together and all the ideas and learnings and progress and wisdom that you've shared. I'm taking away so many ideas, but I think most importantly, the idea of really sitting with the question of where might we each be upholding the status quo in ways that we may not see that we're doing it. And to sit in that long enough to really have a real answer, and then to move forward from there. To your point, Becky, once we've diagnosed that problem, to move forward in a different kind of reflection and action with others. So thank you all so much again for being here. Thank you to our audience of friends and participants for participating in the conversation. And I will now transition us, I think, into the next part of our agenda. Daryl, Becky, Gnarly, Sam, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
You all. I now have the amazing opportunity to introduce you to my good friend and colleague, Laura Schnurr. Laura is an entrepreneur. She's worked in multiple sectors. She's, in her current professional role, the director of Tamarack's Community Climate Transitions Network. And she's been in that role since its origin about 4 years ago now. The inspiration for community climate transitions came from a model that all of you who have been with Tamarack for a while have helped to develop, a model of supporting place-based collaboratives that have been focused on poverty, and then in its next phase on belonging, and then in its next phase on youth. And so about 5 years ago, with support from the Connolly Foundation and many other changemakers who I know are in our audience today, roundtables and research identified some gaps within the climate ecosystem. And the gap that this group saw was that there weren't enough multi-sector collaboratives that were focused on climate, or that they were focused too narrowly on either mitigation or adaptation, and not enough on closing equity gaps, not enough on distributing the burdens of climate change across everyone, rather than just communities that have already been historically and currently oppressed. And so as a response, Tamarack and 19 initial communities launched the Community Climate Transitions Network. And this network of place-based collaboratives focused on just climate transitions has really grown in its reach and its depth since those early years. And Laura is going to share more about that. So Laura, over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Danya, for setting the stage there. It's a real honor to be popping in for a couple minutes to announce the amazing community-led climate projects that are receiving support this year through the Community Climate Transitions Innovation Fund. So this is a fund that we launched last year, thanks to support from our partner, Definity Foundation. And it was designed to accelerate local climate projects that center equity, community engagement, and cross-sector collaboration. Last year, we were able to support 6 innovative projects from coast to coast, and we've just supported 6 new projects to receive Innovation Fund grants this year. Before we announce these, we want to share a video that is hot off the press, produced by the filmmaker Tamara Solomon and several of our members, showing some inspiring results from the 2023 projects.
My organization is Crew Community Resilient to Extreme Weather.
Sarah Freeland, I'm the Manager of Engagement and Technical Services at the Aboriginal Housing Management Association, which we call AMA for short.
Our organization is Environment Lethbridge, and we're a community-based organization, and one of our key focus areas at the moment is around climate resilience.
We're the HRM Community Climate Transitions Team, a diverse collaborative at work in Chipuktuk. also known as Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Moi, je m'appelle Femke Bergsma et je travaille au GRAM, le groupe de recommandations et d'actions pour un meilleur environnement, en tant que coordonnatrice du programme Écoquartier à la Chine, qui est un arrondissement de Montréal.
And we are part of the Climate Transition Network with Tamarack. And we are creating climate resilient and a very low-income, high-rise community.
So all of our members own and operate a variety of buildings that provide housing and other services to the urban Indigenous population. And we want to make sure that those buildings are resilient to climate change.
Climate resilience is really about being prepared, and it's about being prepared in a proactive way. And so that means everything from, do you as a person have things like an emergency kit in your home? But also, is your community and your neighborhood prepared?
On est aussi très conscient que les changements climatiques affectent plus des populations vulnérables. Et donc, on veut vraiment créer un environnement qui est plus équitable au niveau environnemental. Donc, on fait beaucoup d'actions directes sur le terrain, on fait énormément de verdissement, on fait les programmes écoquartiers, donc par exemple par des opérations de nettoyage, par un meilleur recyclage, on donne des ateliers éducatifs.
The project is intended to create a database at its foundational level, and then one or more styles of map to show the network of people working on climate action across HRM.
And also increasing the visibility of smaller and lesser known organizations and groups working across the municipality.
The 2021 heat wave that impacted British Columbia, we started to recognize that there was a big gap in our service offering and a huge need from our members to get support in building climate resiliency.
Being emergency preparedness was like something I never even thought of, like, oh yeah, that actually makes so much sense, especially in my building when we're prone to so many water shutoffs and power outages. I feel it's like something that's actually that everyone, and not just in my building, but our entire neighborhood should practice as well.
The real win from our perspective has been being able to bring so many different people together and just kind of make the community around climate work in Lethbridge bigger.
Tamarack a soutenu notre travail et nos réussites beaucoup par les conférences, les ateliers qu'on a avec vous. Ça m'a vraiment plus ouvert c'est des différentes choses qu'on peut faire pour rejoindre les gens. Et c'est vraiment important d'avoir des autres idées, des outils.
The Innovation Fund accelerated the HRM ecosystem project, especially as certain questions kept coming up for the team in conversation. So who is doing what, where are they working, and what are the most critical gaps that we're seeing? What we needed was to better understand the network of the individuals, NGOs, research institutions, government bodies, and businesses working locally, and to see the challenges and opportunities within our climate system.
Thank you very much to Tamarack for taking time and taking very huge interest in our work. And especially, as you can see, all the volunteers, their voice is very important.
Our members drive all the work that we do, and everything that we do is in support of them. And so making sure that their engagement was integral to the project, and we're working with them to better understand their needs, that was really supported by Tamarack.
We're learning a lot from Tamarack and feeling really good about partnering with them on this. I think it's helped us really drive this forward and feel confident that we can do this work.
I love those stories. It's been incredible following these projects over the past year. So this year's projects are spread across 5 provinces and are in communities ranging from towns in rural Newfoundland to a neighborhood in a big city of Montreal. So the first project, supported at the seed level, receiving $2,000, is a game, J'habite ici, or I live here. So we can go to the next slide and learn more about that one. This game is designed to help residents engage in understanding and solving the housing crisis while making connections to climate and social justice issues. The game was developed by a resident-led coalition operating in Centre-Sud and Hochelaga, Maisonneuve neighborhoods. The next project that's supported at the seed level as well is with the Montérégie Regional Environmental Committee operating across Quebec's Montérégie region. They will deliver webinars and other support to municipalities, community organizations, and residents to embed social equity, inclusion, and community engagement in their local climate plans. Now, the next 3 projects you'll see are being supported at the sprouting level. The first one here is led by Climate Action London and focuses on increasing youth engagement and participation in local climate work and focusing on inclusion of equity-deserving communities. They'll be bringing on a community engagement coordinator to support this. Next, we head out east to Antigonish, Nova Scotia, where a group of resident organizers, Elder, Albert, Marshall, and local partners will host learning spaces for Indigenous and non-Indigenous community members alike to learn about two-eyed seeing, a concept that Elder Marshall coined that speaks to weaving together Indigenous and Western knowledges. Next, we have a project in Canmore, Alberta, that will create spaces for residents to come together and build a sense of belonging and connection and community while tackling climate change. The Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley will lead this work with several local partners and will center the voices of those with lived experience. And finally, the project receiving a $10,000 grant at the scaling level is one in Newfoundland, where youth-led town halls will be hosted in 5 coastal communities that share a watershed and are facing increasing threats from storms and rising sea levels. This project is led by the Indian Bay Ecosystem Corporation, local municipalities, Gidawake Joint Council, and municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador. So what's a common thread across all these projects? I would argue that it's the power of people and place. Each of them demonstrates how much power already exists within communities and can be activated to accelerate climate action. Huge congratulations to all these project partners. We're really looking forward to following these over time. Now back to you, Heather and Nick.
Thank you so much. How exciting. All right. Well, Nick, let's do a little exercise. We've been sitting here and our brains are probably like so full. Can you take us through a little exercise?
Yes, I can. We're going to do a breathing exercise. So we're going to breathe in, bring our hands up, and breathe out, and bring our hands down. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, and breathe in, and breathe out peace and love. And all the hard work that we have done today.
Yes, and then shake it all out because we've been sitting still. Okay, wow, what a day. It has taken us 6 months to get here, and you know what? I think I'm just going to say thank you so much, team who put all this together, because this was an amazing day. We started off with Louise and Meg, who talked about leadership. It's about relationships, honesty, listening, being human, and daring to live the future now. Then we connected, learned, and shared through 7 workshops. We went, and I'm just going to, oh no, we have some feedback from our workshops. I really enjoyed the chance to play with tools with my colleagues. Thank you for this great workshop. I really appreciated learning from you and all the other participants. Many thanks for our speakers and participants for creating such a welcoming space. It was amazing. We then ended our learning journey today with George talking about power and grounding ourselves in shifting. And I loved how we talked about there are different two levels of power. And I kind of think of it as a hydraulics. How can we balance this out? And one of the things that stuck out for me was these purposeful blanks. Don't come with a completely polished document. Have purposeful blanks. And then we ended with what Genevieve says was, oh, I lost this. Thank you very much. Great panel discussion. I couldn't have said it any better. And some of the highlights and tips were downstream solutions for upstream problems. Loved it. Fear of failing. My son's in hockey, and there's a Wayne Gretzky quote. If you're one of those hockey people, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Then we had Gnarly talking about youth, and really youth are so important, and that they need to be who they want to be, not who we want them to be. And then I kind of have a kindred spirit with Daryl because he talked about asset-based community development, and I'm the asset-based community development director here at Tamarack. And so I think, talking about what is strong and what is our passion and what is our purpose will equal change. So that is our day. And I have a question for you, Nick, because I know Large Canada has been shifting leadership and power. Can you talk and tell everybody about that?
Yes, I can. So, nothing about us without us. It needs to happen. It needs to happen everywhere. Not just everywhere, but also the whole world, too. And work and employment, people want jobs. People with disabilities want jobs. It's also not about what people in power think about people with disabilities everywhere. It's also about what we want with people with disabilities too. And power needs to shift. It needs to shift not just for us, but also everywhere. And that's how nothing about us happens without us. We're in it together. And I thought that today was very important and inspirational, powerful, important, and that everything went really well today. Heather, what is something that inspired you today?
So I've been thinking about this. I'm a paper person. And so I'm thinking how important it is to center people in our work. And right off from the very beginning, how do we center them? How do we get to know them? How do we build relationships? And also about the spaces and the places and how important that is. When George was talking about how we set up our rooms, it really got me thinking, and this is, what we're going to be talking about tomorrow, about the places in our spaces, but how it's not rocket science, really. It is a really simple way of setting up our tables, setting up our rooms, setting up our chairs. Do we have to be in a boardroom? Can we be out in the park? Why have a meeting when you can have a party? Like, what are the ways that we can really center our spaces and our places so that it shifts the power? The other thing is stepping up. And going back to that fear of failure, how do we start little? Because every inch will lead to that mile that we want to get to. And so we always want to go in and we're thinking that we have to think to that mile. And if we don't get to that mile right from the get-go, then it's a failure. What if we start thinking little by little? And that in terms of those of us who think we're powerless, power can be just as little as an inch. It doesn't have to be a mile. And then the last thing, I just love Elder Alvin, love. And you said that, Nick. Love for one another, love for our work, love for our community, love for our neighbor, love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Love makes the world go round.
Love makes the world go round. That you are so right. And you know who else makes the world go round? Is Sonia Mikovic, who is going to join us right now. And I think you have a question for Sonia, Nick.
Yes, I do. So, Sonia, what is a highlight for you today? And please
Hi,
tell
friend.
us about what we can expect tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nick. I'm starstruck. You're both doing such an incredible job emceeing today. And thanks for the lovely called stage, Heather. That was delightful. My mind and my heart are really full from today. It's been so fun to connect with people both on the House Space platform, but also in the workshops. Some things which really stick with me is when Louise said that relationships form the bedrock of community. And that genuine connection and shared understanding are foundational for collective strength. And then Meg built on that by saying, togetherness is a source of resilience, and no matter what the problem, community is the answer. So that keeps ringing in my mind because I feel like we're really at the right place and having these incredible conversations about the power of community. I also love George's call out to design as a tool for transformation. This came up a lot in the workshop today around creative capacities, and it was a reminder of the power of this collective imagination which we have and which we're continuing to build. So opening up new ways and pathways for ideas. So those are some of the things that really stuck with me. I know we're talking about coffee chats tomorrow, and we know who loves coffee. So we're going to pass it over to Heather to tell us a little bit about that. And then I'll tell you more about the agenda for tomorrow.
I forgot something. I forgot to direct people to the aha moments. So you've just heard Nick's ahas, mine ahas, and Sonia's ahas. We want to hear yours. What is your aha moment for today? And somebody told me, and I can't remember, that an aha is something you already knew that just came to the front of your mind. So please go down and type in your aha moments right below us. And speaking of coffee, yes, I do love coffee, a really good cup of coffee. Before the event starts tomorrow, we have 2 coffee chats happening. One is at 10, they start at 10:15 and go for 10:45. Casual, come with a cup of coffee, and we're going to chat about 2 different topics. The first one is that you probably all know, but if you don't, Tamarack has launched an idea. We launched it last year, a national belonging strategy for Canada. And George and I will be there to have coffee with you all, to explore the power of people in place in creating the sense of belonging. And we'll talk a little bit more about that national strategy and ways that you can help and contribute to that strategy. And if that's not your cup of tea because you want coffee, the other one is to learn about Tamarack. So at Engagefest, it's only 2 days. And we all know that you're going to leave so inspired and energized, and you're going to want to get into your community and you want to make some change. But we do know that community change work can be hard. And it's not easy and lonely. So Tamarack Institute is here to support you. You can join Lisa and Laura, and they're going to share how Tamarack can support and build your capacity, connect you to resources and tools, and really come with some questions. come with some questions and challenges, and they're going to point you in the right direction. So this is a great way for you to learn about what's next after your learning journey with us today. And it's over to you, Nick.
Okay, thank you, Heather. So, the coffee chat sounds so interesting. And what a great way to connect with people and other people that are in this call together. Sonia, what else do we have on the agenda for tomorrow?
Thank you, Nick. Okay, so today we celebrated the power of people, and tomorrow we will focus on the power of place. So we have an excellent day planned, starting off with a panel on harnessing the power of place, how governments can partner with communities to achieve impact. Then we're going to have another series of engaging workshops, our not to be missed tool share session, which is hands-on and very practical, and a thought-provoking keynote from Jessica Baldock. So we have another busy day, and I have the high task of co-emceeing with you, Nick, tomorrow.
That is correct.
I'm a little bit sad. I'm not going to be MC tomorrow. I know, Nick, you're going to have some withdrawal from Heather, but Sonia will definitely keep the energy.
We'll miss you.
We'll both keep the energy.
I'm just going to highlight some ahas here. You know, Nick, someone here says our hosts are awesome. We might be biased, but I think we are.
But I think we are.
Yeah.
And I think I know who that is.
Leaving work strategically unfinished. Wow, so many aha moments. Enable, not empower. Downstream initiatives are not going to fix upstream problems. A lot to reflect on. Thank you so much. Shifting from user-centered design to user-created design. Our stories are our gifts. There is nothing more powerful than a community discovering itself and its own assets. I 100% agree, Liz. George's 5 principles for shifting power asymmetry. I took lots of notes for that. That was really, and it's really something that we should be centering every time we're planning on engaging with folks. There's a lot more. But you know what? We actually had a discussion and we wanted to try to get out early. We know today was really, really hard. We crammed your brains full. So we have one last question for you. And we always do checkouts at Tamarack here. And so I'm going to ask you, Nick and Sonia, the same question, but we want to know from all of you one word that describes how you're leaving the event today. So Nick, one word that describes how you're leaving today.
I am leaving here today with importance of nothing about us without us.
I think you need to shout that.
And how power needs to shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's how I'm leaving here today.
Awesome. Sonia, what's one word that how you're leaving today?
I am leaving with a feeling of love.
Love.
And I was
Feeling of love.
anticipating that.
I am leaving here full. I love these events. I wish they were in person, but this is, I don't know, I've done 30 some odd Tamarack events and they fill my bucket for the year. And so hopefully one day we'll be able to do it back in person so that I could overflow my bucket. But these events fill my bucket and I'm a little sad and jealous that I'm not doing it tomorrow and that Sonia's taking over my spot. But I will pop in. I'm going to try to see if I can pop in sometime tomorrow. So over to you, Sonia.
All right. So thank you, everyone, for the energy, connection, and wisdom you brought to day one of Engagefest. See you all tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern or 10:15 if you're joining the coffee chats. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody.
Take care.